Theirs was for the ages. She was a devoted single mother looking for a fresh start.
She was a nice young lady, very warm, very caring.
He was a small-town cop who'd sworn to serve her and protect her.
Police work was his passion. He bled blue.
But just when it seems their relationship is destined for new heights, tragedy strikes like a lightning bolt.
Yes, man, something ain't right.
A terrifying disappearance sparks a massive search.
Deep down, I think everybody knew something was very wrong.
And a mysterious string of notes left behind points police in the direction of an unlikely suspect.
That note was a note of somebody very troubled.
When the cloud of mystery is lifted, one person is dead, and a key witness has no memory of what's transpired.
He was found laying face down.
There's blood on the bed, there's blood on the floor. She's laying kind of crumpled.
I didn't believe it, didn't want to believe it, This is not happening.
It was like an episode of The Twilight Zone. She has the knowledge of Wayne's murder, but not the memory of it.
December 11th, 2004. It's a tranquil evening in the city of Gainesville, Texas. But just past 4 a.m., a night manager at a local hotel receives an alarming call from one of their guests. Heading down the hall to investigate, the manager attempts to enter the guest's room, but finds it locked.
Hello, ma'am? Ma'am, hello? Miss, management.
The door had the deadbolt, so the front desk worker called the maintenance man and actually had him break down the door.
Stepping inside the darkened room, the two men make a startling discovery. Lying on the floor and alone in the room is the female caller.
The room was kind of in a disarray, and they found her laying bloody on the floor, crumpled up, almost fetal-like position.
The woman seems to be in a daze and is slurring her words.
I just need to get up. She's on the floor, and she has what they can see as a gunshot wound.
The bullet went in her head just above her eye.
No, just stay down, okay? Just stay down.
Lying beside the woman is a .25 caliber handgun.
Just keep talking to us.
The hotel manager dials 911.
Yes, I need emergency. I've got a woman shot.
Within minutes, police officers are on the scene.
When they get there, the scene is fairly chaotic. Their first response is number one, to take care of her, to try to assess her injuries and save her life.
Ma'am, where are you hurt? Ooh, hey, let's make sure we get an ambulance for her real quick.
Stormy at 1047. I got one black female gunshot wound to the head. Step it up, please.
EMTs arrive moments later, and the woman is immediately rushed to a nearby trauma center. But given her life-threatening injuries, it's unclear whether she'll live or die. Meanwhile, at the hotel, authorities try and make sense of what happened.
There was alcohol there. I think there were some over-the-counter sleeping pills and things she had bought.
Finding no one else in the room, officers are left with one of two scenarios. Either the woman's injuries were self-inflicted, or her assailant had fled the scene.
It's like, what is going on here? Why is the room torn up? Like, why? What is going on?
The whole thing just seemed more bizarre than anything.
The situation grows more disturbing when police identify the woman as Denise Miller and discover that Denise and her boyfriend, police officer Wayne Irby, were reported missing just 24 hours earlier.
Officer Irby did not show up for work. He's missing and she's missing. That raised everybody's red flags.
But what exactly had happened, and where was Denise's boyfriend now? Unraveling that mystery would require investigators to reconstruct the terrible events of the last 24 hours, and along the way, expose a tale of love, jealousy, and some say, cold-blooded murder. Growing up in Kansas City, Missouri, Denise Swall was one of the most popular girls in school.
Everybody liked Denise. She seemed like such a sweet person, bubbly and personable.
Even as a teenager, Denise dreamed of the day she could start her own family. A dream that seemed to come true when at 22, she married her college sweetheart. In 1986, Denise gave birth to a beautiful baby girl named Whitney, and 2 years later, to son Walter.
They were wonderful children. Both of her kids were wonderful kids.
But after the birth of her children, Denise's marriage began to falter. In 1995, she and her husband filed for divorce. Looking to start her life over, at 36, Denise packed up the kids and moved to the close-knit Dallas suburb of Little Elm, Texas.
She was just looking for a clean slate, you know, a fresh start, just getting away from old places that probably brought up bad memories.
Denise landed a great job with a local liquor distributor. She managed her money well and was able to build a stunning new home for her and her children.
She seemed to be very successful, beautiful home, beautiful family, pictures on the wall. Everything was perfect.
Well, almost perfect. Denise still wanted a good man to share her success with. Then one day in 2003, Denise answered a knock on her front door and was caught off guard to see a police officer standing outside.
Hi, how you doing?
Hello.
My name is Wayne Irby of the Little Elm Police Department. I noticed you had your garage door open. We got a lot of thefts in the neighborhood. You might want to close it.
Okay.
Well, I'm giving you my card, okay? You give me a call if you need anything, all right?
I will do that.
All right, now appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, now.
Denise appreciated the gesture, especially since it was coming from a big, strong officer like 37-year-old Wayne Irby. A 6-year veteran of the Little Elm Police Department, Wayne wore his passion for his job on his sleeve.
And he bled blue, as we say in the law enforcement industry.
He was somebody that liked to get out and meet people on his beat. He was just one of those people that made you feel good.
It wasn't long before Officer Irby came knocking on Denise's door again. But this time, it had nothing to do with police work.
Since we last met, I definitely couldn't stop thinking about you. And I was hoping I could take you out to dinner, you know, maybe a movie.
Sure.
He told me, man, I met this young lady. He said, I think I'm gonna settle down with this one.
Denise felt the same way. And after their very first date, the couple became exclusive.
He took to her just as much as she was taken by him. And I think it clicked in that sense. I mean, how could it not?
Wayne Irby started talking about how serious they were getting. He said he really liked Denise a lot.
Receive $100?
A divorced dad himself, Wayne was an immediate hit with Denise's 2 kids.
The kids and him got along great. They treated Wayne like a father figure. They seemed to be all one big happy family.
Even so, as the relationship progressed, Denise began to suspect Wayne was just a little too friendly with some other women he ran into on his beat.
He was a ladies' man. There were a lot of women in the community and outside of the community that would talk about him often.
Eventually, Denise confronted Wayne about the situation, but Wayne vehemently denied the accusations.
He would get upset with her and tell her, you know, there's nothing going on with anybody. He'd tell me, Walker, man, I'm not doing anything.
Was Wayne being honest? On the surface, it was hard to tell. Either way, the allegations took a toll on the relationship.
When there is a trust break, not only do you mistrust that person, then you mistrust the things within yourself.
But by the spring of 2004, Wayne and Denise seemed to have put their trust issues behind them. And later that year, the couple bought a house together.
At that point in his life, he was ready to settle down, and that's the reason he bought that home with her.
But life under the same roof wasn't everything Wayne and Denise expected. And soon, the couple's old trust issues began to rear their head again. A few months later, Wayne decided they should go their separate ways.
There's a lot of crying, a lot of tears.
They were fighting, and he was threatening on leaving.
Wayne moved into a rental home across town. But when Denise unexpectedly lost her job in November of that year, he began having second thoughts about the separation.
They reconciled when Denise lost her job because he didn't want her and her children to not have a home, and tried to work it out.
But just as it seemed Denise and Wayne were back on track, their world turned upside down. It begins at 6 a.m. on December 10th, 2004. Members of the Little Elm Police Department file into their squad room for their morning briefing. Everyone, that is, except for Wayne Irby.
And he hadn't come in. And so, you know, he called, he didn't answer. And that was, well, first of all, it wasn't normal behavior.
Irby? Have I seen Irby? When he comes in, let me know.
An hour passes, then 2. Wayne is still a no-show for work.
He was always at work, there early, ready to go.
It's uncommon, almost unheard of, for an officer to not show up on duty when it's his turn. And so everyone knew early on that something was just not right.
What no one on the police force realizes is that Officer Wayne Irby isn't the only missing person in the town of Little Elm. So is the love of his life, Sir Wayne Irby. But despite their undeniable chemistry, the relationship had its fair share of ups and downs.
It was somewhat stormy. They had their problems.
Things had gotten serious, but there was a concern about her jealous tendencies, and there were some underlying issues in their relationship that had to be resolved.
Just when it seems Denise and Wayne patch things up, police in their hometown of Little Elm, Texas, find themselves embroiled in a mystery. It starts on December 10th, 2004, when Wayne failed to report to duty for his 6 a.m. shift.
Wayne was not somebody that was late. And so when he did not show up as he was scheduled, didn't come to briefing, didn't call anybody, people began to worry.
That just didn't make any sense. Wayne always checked his phone. He always played his messages.
But as the hours roll by, Wayne's friends on the force grow increasingly concerned, particularly Cynthia Medrano.
I went into the chief's office and I said, something's wrong. He's not calling me back. Something's wrong.
Hey, Cynthia, what can I do for you?
I haven't heard from Wayne at all, and I'm really worried.
Tell you what, I'll have a couple officers swing by and do a welfare check, okay?
Thank you.
Just before noon, Police Chief Waylon Rhodes dispatches officers to conduct a welfare check at the house Wayne shares with Denise and her children.
We had officers go by Denise's home. We knocked and nobody answered.
There were no vehicles in the driveway. The doors were locked, front and back door.
Now unable to locate either Wayne or Denise, police shoot for the next best thing.
We went to the high school and talked to the kids, Denise's kids.
I'd like to ask you a few questions, if that's okay.
That's fine.
According to Denise's children, they hadn't seen their mom or Wayne in nearly 24 hours.
They had said she had not come home that night and didn't know where she was.
Denise's daughter, Whitney, also recounts a disturbing phone call she'd received around midnight.
She was like, I'm running errands, and then she said, I love you.
Is that unusual?
She doesn't usually talk like that.
She doesn't.
She said that they could get themselves ready for school in the morning. Her kids were old enough and certainly mature enough to take care of themselves, and it's exactly what they did.
Whitney states that before heading off to school that morning, she tried to call her mother one more time.
She wasn't answering her cell phone. They couldn't find their mom. She was missing.
Whitney says this seemed completely out of character for their mother. For police, it's a startling turn of events. They've got not one, but two missing persons.
Deep down, I think everybody knew something was very wrong.
Nobody is more concerned for Wayne Irby's safety than his partner on the force, Jerry Walker. After searching the streets of Little Elm for hours, Walker and another officer, James Wynn, decide to check out the rental home Wayne vacated when he moved back in with Denise. They obtain a key from the landlord and prepare to enter the home.
Wayne? Wayne! Dining room clear.
In the kitchen, officers make an ominous discovery.
He and I both observed Wayne's fanny pack that he carried with him often and his cell phone. And that was a sign immediately that this was not good.
Moments later, Officer James Wynn turns the corner down a hallway and sees something that stops him dead in his tracks.
James Wynn sliced around the corner and took a gasp of breath. And he stopped and backed up, and he looked at me and said,
Don't come any closer.
Just stop right where you're at.
But at this point, Detective Walker has come too far not to press forward.
Wayne Irby was lying on the ground, and there was what looked like an injury to the back of his head.
There was no sign of any fight or any violence at all.
It seems the search for Wayne Irby has just taken a turn from the mysterious to the macabre. But where is Denise? It's a question that will soon be magnified by another troubling discovery. Hunt for missing police officer Wayne Irby and his longtime girlfriend Denise Miller has just taken a dark and bloody turn. Police have found Wayne inside a rental home in Little Elm, Texas, the victim of an apparent gunshot wound.
It was very sullen moment. This was the first murder of my career, and it happened to be my partner.
I was at work when I got the call. It was devastating.
Given that Denise had failed to return home the previous evening, officers fear for her safety as well. But they find no sign of Denise anywhere inside Wayne's home.
It didn't take more than 40 seconds to finish up checking the rest of the rooms, and she wasn't there.
Officers radio for backup. Within minutes, investigators from both the Denton County Sheriff's Office and the Texas Rangers begin the grim task of processing the scene.
He was shot one single time, right almost dead center in the back of the head.
The location of the wounds suggests Officer Irby never saw the kill shot coming.
Yeah, so that would place the shooter about here.
Was it possible Wayne had been ambushed? If so, by whom? Given Wayne's passion for police work, one possible theory is that the shooting could be work-related.
In police work, you're not gonna always make everybody happy. Sometimes, no matter what you do, you're gonna piss somebody off.
However, Wayne's partner, Jerry Walker, finds it difficult to believe Wayne's murder is related to the job.
He's just a very personable guy. Easy to talk to, always smiling, you know? There's no way he could have had any enemies out there.
But if the crime isn't work-related, then what sparked this fatal encounter? Given the timing of Denise's disappearance, detectives can't help but wonder if she could be involved.
She was not there, and Wayne's handguns were not there either. We didn't know where she had gone.
But to those who know Denise and Wayne best, this theory seems equally implausible.
I don't think anybody thought that she was capable of doing something like this.
I didn't see that side of Denise. I thought she was a very caring young lady.
Still, Denise's sudden disappearance does raise a number of troubling questions, not the least of which is the fear that she may be a victim as well.
We put out an all-points bulletin for Denise Miller with her description and vehicle description that we knew of, and then just hope to hear something soon.
While patrol officers search for Denise, detectives begin the process of interviewing friends and colleagues, and quickly realize Wayne and Denise have had their ups and downs. The roots of the couple's problems always centered on one thing: Denise's suspicions that Wayne was cheating on her.
He was really friendly, though, so that might have been just a natural response. He was really friendly, really charming.
There was a constant thought that he was doing something outside of their relationship that he shouldn't be.
She was always accusing him of messing with other women. She never trusted him.
In speaking to the couple's friends, investigators can't help but wonder if there's some truth to the rumors of Wayne's infidelity. But if the allegations are true, it opens up a whole Pandora's box of possible suspects.
It could be one of them other female friends that he was talking to that he cut ties with. You know, if I can't have him, you can't, and then I'm gonna end your life too.
With the case getting more twisted and more scandalous by the minute, police decide to search Denise's home in Little Elm.
We go through and we start looking and we don't see any signs of anything.
But in the master bedroom, investigators find a startling piece of evidence.
They found a note. It was a handwritten note, seemed to be coming from Denise.
The letter, I think, was indicative of someone who was contemplating suicide, if you read between the lines.
But the note isn't the only discovery that gives investigators cause for alarm.
Here's his duty belt.
When they were searching the house, his uniforms are hung in the closet. His duty belt is hanging on the wall, and the holster was empty.
Did you find his gun? No, sir, I haven't. We need to find that thing.
Between the missing weapon and the possible suicide note, it seems a new theory about Wayne's death is beginning to emerge.
You know, the police are never, ever going to rule out any other possibilities, but everything in this case pointed towards Denise.
But is Denise truly responsible for Wayne's death? Or are other more sinister factors at play? While police are still uncertain, one thing is clear. They need to find Denise Miller, and they need to find her. Elm, Texas have discovered missing police officer Wayne Irby gunned down inside his former rental home. At first, detectives feared Wayne's girlfriend Denise might also be a victim. However, a bizarre note found inside the home they shared, coupled with a missing handgun, have detectives wondering if Denise might have killed Wayne, then turned the gun on herself.
They found a note inside Denise Miller's house. It was a disturbing note saying, "I'm tired of hurting. I don't want to hurt anymore." It was kind of a desperate plea.
If Denise has taken her own life, it's imperative detectives find her body. But there's a chance the suicide note is just a ruse. And if so, they must consider Denise armed and dangerous.
I was worried about another police officer having an encounter with her, and either A, her harming him, or B, him having to use deadly force against her. So everyone was very aware of the situation.
As their search for Denise intensifies, investigators must decipher what Denise meant by her troubling letter. Curious if the couple had any prior domestic altercations, detectives decide to dig deeper into Denise and Wayne's relationship and make a shocking discovery in the process.
She had come to the police department to file a complaint against Officer Irby for domestic violence. She had said that he had assaulted her.
According to the affidavit from December 2003, it started when Denise showed up unannounced at Wayne's rental home and discovered Wayne with another woman.
Denise showed up at his house, and the house that he lived in had a window right by the door, and you could see the female's purse on the table. And Denise kept knocking on the door. He was not going to open the door because he knew there would be trouble.
But Denise wouldn't stop knocking. Eventually, Wayne opened the door.
That's when all hell broke loose.
Who is that woman?
Look, Denise, she's just a friend of mine.
Wayne, what is she doing here?
We're just having a cup of coffee, that's it.
The report asserts that the couple started arguing, and the encounter quickly turned physical.
Every time I turn around, you're doing the same thing!
According to the incident report, both Denise and Wayne suffered physical injuries, but it seems Wayne got the worst of it.
He had scratches all over his face. He had a big black eye.
Pursuant to the report, Wayne claimed Denise had been the aggressor and that he'd simply tried to defuse the situation.
She went nuts. She started smacking him and hitting him and punching him.
When Wayne's female friend corroborated his version of the incident, Denise withdrew her complaint.
She came in, I think, the next day and said she had made it up. It didn't really happen. They talked to Wayne, and he said that she had come at him, and he was really trying to defend himself, and he had injuries too.
I think it was a heat of the moment situation, and they were arguing or fighting or something. She got mad, and she was going to take her pound of flesh, and it didn't matter to her what happened.
And according to several of Wayne's friends, after the incident, Denise's behavior grew increasingly erratic.
He and I were working a traffic crash, and we were out on the road for a long time. And when he got back in the car, he just shook his head and showed me a cell phone with many, many missed calls, and they were all from Denise Miller.
It got to the point where he just, he felt smothered and smelled like, she was just too jealous. He said, "I can't take this anymore."
One of Wayne's friends told investigators that the day before his death, Wayne decided to end things with Denise once and for all.
They wasn't getting along as well, and he mentioned to me that he was gonna move out, and he just wanted out altogether. His mind was made up.
Along with her suicide note, Wayne's decision to leave Denise for good seems to cement her involvement in his murder. As does another chilling bit of evidence CSIs later find at the scene of the crime.
At Wayne Irby's residence, they found on the kitchen island a note, a handwritten note from Denise that said, "I'm sorry, I took both of our lives. Please contact our moms."
Basically, it was a confession note that she apologized for what she had done.
So I was just shocked. I didn't believe it. Didn't want to believe it, This is not happening.
The notes suggest Denise has also taken her own life, but investigators know that finding her is now more important than ever.
I really thought in the back of my head that she had gone somewhere else to commit suicide. But if she's capable of shooting someone she loved, she's more than capable of shooting anyone else.
Thankfully, it doesn't take long for the All Points Bulletin on Denise to pay dividends. And at 4 a.m. on December 11th, police in Little Elm receive a call of a possible suicide attempt at a hotel in nearby Gainesville.
We got a call from Gainesville police. They linked the bulletin that we put out to Denise Miller. She had a gunshot wound to the head.
They found Denise on the floor with the covers off of the bed, obviously in distress. She was seriously injured. The .25 caliber handgun was found on the floor next to her.
Paramedics rushed Denise to an area hospital. In the meantime, investigators combed the room for evidence.
There was alcohol there. There was some over-the-counter sleeping pills.
Investigators also find Wayne's missing .40 caliber service pistol inside the room, along with evidence that explains how Denise's suicide attempt went awry.
They found one of Wayne's handguns. It looked like she'd attempted to load it and tried to load it with the bullet backwards so it wouldn't chamber.
When Wayne's service weapon jammed, it appeared Denise had tried to end her life using the next best thing, a .25 caliber pistol.
She's probably crying the whole way, like, oh my God, what have I done? You know, probably remorse has set in.
I think she wanted to forget about what she just did. If she bought the bottle of alcohol and sleeping pills, she just wanted to forget about everything. But then, you know, it was her time to try to end her life too.
But just when it seems like police are starting to put the pieces of this puzzle together, investigators discover a third suicide note. One that suggests that even though she planned to kill herself, Denise hadn't intended to kill the love of her life.
She writes a very lengthy, at least in comparison to the two previous notes, a very lengthy suicide note.
There was a line in the note that alluded to her accidentally shooting Wayne and that she freaked out and just ran.
But was Wayne's death truly an accident? Only one person knew for certain, and she was lying in a hospital bed with a bullet lodged in her brain. And the story she'd tell police would throw the entire case into an upheaval.
Denise, can you tell me what happened in Little Elm last night?
Yeah.
You know Wayne's hurt, right?
I don't think so.
Depending on where she was shot in her head, it could just cause a lot of things. You can call it amnesia, you know, temporary memory loss. She's not clearly in her right mind.
11th, 2004. Just 12 hours after her longtime lover, Wayne Irby, was found shot to death, Denise Miller put a .25 caliber handgun to her head and pulled the trigger. Detectives have also found a series of suicide notes that seem to link Denise to Wayne's murder and suggest that if Denise couldn't have Wayne, no one could.
Wayne had made his mind up to end that relationship.
She's not clearly in her right mind because everything is going on in her head. It could have been a psychotic break.
But just when police seem to have solved the crime, a third and final suicide note found inside Denise's hotel room suggests Wayne's death might not have been intentional.
There was a single line about it was an accident.
Hoping to unravel this mystery before it's too late, investigators race to the hospital where Denise is being treated for the self-inflicted gunshot wound.
Denise Miller shot herself in the head. That trauma affected her brain, her cognitive abilities. It also affected her motor skills.
Despite her injuries, investigators believe Denise is coherent enough to provide a statement.
They're not sure at that point what her prognosis is going to be, so I wanted to get as much as a statement as I could from her.
That afternoon, doctors allowed Texas Ranger Tracy Murphy to proceed with the interview.
I'd like to ask you a few questions.
Placing a recorder by her bedside, Murphy questions Denise about the events leading up to the shooting.
Denise, can you tell me what happened in Little Elm last night?
Nothing.
You know Wayne's hurt, right?
I don't think so.
You don't think so? How come you left a note there telling me what happened to Wayne?
I don't know.
She could talk, but she had very limited recollection at that time of what had gone on. According to her, she was not aware that she had shot herself.
Although clearly reeling from injuries, when pressed for more details, Denise does admit to being in Wayne's house the day of the shooting.
Did you see him at his new house?
Yeah.
What happened there, Denise?
We argued.
About him moving out?
Yeah.
Then what happened?
When I told her that she had hurt Wayne, she said she hadn't. And then when I told her, I said, look, Wayne's dead, her basic response was, no, he's not.
It seemed suspicious to us that she could remember things from before, she could remember things from after, but somehow the part about killing Wayne Irby was gone.
Is Denise in denial? Or is there another possible explanation for her sudden memory loss?
She's got a combination of drugs and alcohol in her system, and she shot herself. So all that combined, you can kind of understand why she's completely disoriented.
The brain is a powerful thing. It's a powerful mechanism. It will shut down to protect you. Me personally, I've had a head injury, and I can't tell you certain things that happened. I can tell you what other people have told me, and I can remember certain incidents, but the actual time that it happened, I couldn't tell you.
After being questioned, Denise is sedated and flown to a nearby trauma center for additional treatment. When she wakes the following morning, her memory loss seems to have gotten worse. She's also now paralyzed on one side of her body and blind in one eye.
The nurse stated that when she told Denise that Wayne had been killed and that she had shot herself, that she seemed genuinely shocked.
It was very convenient for her not to have to remember what she did. But the fact of the matter was she killed a human being.
It was frustrating to a lot of officers, yeah, because everyone really wonders, is she just faking it?
On December 13th, police received the results of Wayne's autopsy report. The official cause of death is trauma caused by a single .25 caliber bullet to the back of the head. Ballistics revealed the bullet was fired from the exact same weapon Denise used in her botched suicide attempt. Running the weapon's serial number, police learned the gun is registered to Denise's stepfather. So how did it end up in Wayne's rental home? To investigators, the answer seems obvious.
I think she took that gun with her there to give him an ultimatum that she wanted him back. And if the answer was no, I think she intended to use it.
If she's going over to a situation that she knows is volatile, or at least not good, and takes a gun with her, this was not an accident.
On January 18th, 2005, police charged Denise Miller with first-degree murder. News of her arrest leaves friends and a community stunned.
People were numb, couldn't believe what happened.
I think everyone, or at least the people that were close to Wayne and knew Denise, didn't see it coming.
After 18 months of rehab and physical therapy, Denise is declared competent to stand trial. On July 10, 2006, at the Denton County Courthouse, the state of Texas versus Denise Miller gets underway. While the victim's friends and family are desperate to see justice served, Denise's supporters believe she's already paid a steep price for her own actions.
She was in a wheelchair. She was a very frail and weakened condition.
In their opening arguments, prosecutors urged jurors not to be swayed by Denise's frail appearance.
The prosecution said she looks like this, she acts like this, she's in this wheelchair because of something she did to herself.
Describing Denise as a jealous lover hell-bent on controlling her man, prosecutors assert that on December 9, 2004, Denise drove to Wayne's rental home armed with her stepfather's .25 caliber handgun. An argument allegedly ensued, and Wayne told Denise that the relationship was over once and for all.
I just can't do this anymore. You know, I was never cheating on you. You know, I've been there for you guys. You know, I love the kids. I can't do it anymore. I'm tired.
That's when, according to prosecutors, Denise took aim and fired.
Denise came to the house. She brought her .25 caliber handgun with her. There appears to have been an argument. Either Wayne was done arguing or he saw the gun. One reason or another, he turned his back on her and he was shot.
They called it the classic case of, if I can't have you, nobody else can.
To bolster their case, prosecutors introduced Denise's 3 suicide notes as evidence.
It's a confession. I mean, those notes were confessions.
Although defense attorneys don't dispute Denise had shot Wayne, they argue the officer's death had been a tragic accident.
She did go into a volatile situation. She did have a gun with her, but she didn't mean to do it. It was an accident.
And the proof, they claim, were Denise's own words in the moments before she shot herself.
They pointed to the note that said, you know, I didn't mean to do it. I freaked out and I ran.
When people are writing their last note, their last words, their dying declaration, it's usually pretty credible. You can usually take it at face value.
But in Cross, prosecutors urged jurors to judge the body of that work and not one line possibly taken out of context.
There was a single line about it was an accident, but it was surrounded by a lot of things that indicate it wasn't an accident. Things like, thou shalt not kill, I've done a horrible thing. So it's like she mixes in her guilt with that one line.
Still, defense attorneys argue that if Denise had truly intended to kill Wayne that day, her gun would have been fully loaded and she would have pulled the trigger more than once.
Typically, if you're going in with the intent, the purposeful intent of killing someone, your weapon's fully loaded. It's not kind of a Russian roulette situation. It wasn't fully loaded when he was shot.
It appears Denise's defense team has at least raised the possibility that Wayne's death was an accident. But prosecutors still have one piece of evidence at their disposal, evidence that has the potential to make or break the entire case. Murder of her boyfriend, Wayne Irby. Denise Miller now found herself on trial for a crime she claims to have no memory of committing.
She shot herself in the head. She was in a wheelchair. She had very limited mobility, and she had no recollection of the events whatsoever.
Her defense attorney said it was like an episode of The Twilight Zone. She has the knowledge of Wayne's murder, but not the memory of it.
Defense attorneys have asserted Wayne's death had been a tragic accident. Prosecutors have argued otherwise.
If this was truly an accident, wouldn't you call for help? Wouldn't you call for an ambulance? Miss Miller chose not to do any of these things.
And to bolster their claim that the crime was premeditated, that Denise couldn't have accidentally shot Wayne, they submit findings from the state crime lab into evidence.
We had the trigger of this gun tested, and it takes 4.5 to 5 pounds of pressure just to pull the trigger on this gun. That negates that, she just accidentally touched it and it went off.
Even more telling is the location of Wayne's injuries and Denise's own actions in the aftermath of the shooting.
Shot in the back of the head. What are the chances of accidentally being shot in the back of the head?
If it was truly an accident, the first thing you're going to do is call for an ambulance, call for help. She didn't do that. Instead, she took his gun, wrote a note confessing, and fled.
But could a jury really convict Denise of a crime she had no recollection of committing?
It's a roll of the dice. Whether or not the jury's gonna have any empathy or sympathy for her, or if they're gonna say, you got what you deserved.
It wouldn't take them long to find out. After less than an hour of deliberation, on July 12, 2006, the jury returns with their verdict. Guilty.
Denise was in a wheelchair and she was very quiet, and when the verdict came back, she cried.
While the verdict surprises few in the courtroom, a bigger question still looms. Would jurors take sympathy on the already crippled woman and forego the death penalty?
They can look at her and think, oh, she suffered enough. She felt so bad about what she did. She tried to kill herself, and now look at her. She's, disabled for the rest of her life. She's been punished enough.
The following morning at Denise's sentencing hearing, it appears jurors are in a forgiving mood. Denise is spared the death penalty. Instead, she's sentenced to 62 years in prison.
She wasn't a hardened criminal. She certainly wasn't any kind of threat. A 62-year sentence, it's equivalent to a life sentence, but it's not that word.
I think she should have gotten the death penalty myself.
Her 2 kids lost a mother. The Irby family lost a son, so everybody lost in the situation. There wasn't a win in the situation at all.
The sweltering summer heat of Atlanta usually moves like a slow, sticky exhaust over the asphalt of Peachtree Street, a heavy vapor that smothers the neon lights and dampens the sound of distant sirens cutting through the midnight air. It is July 2026, and the humid breath of the Georgia night carries the thick scent of pine and exhaust, a suffocating combination that seals the city's secrets beneath a canopy of dense oak trees and cracked concrete alleys. But inside the high-security, soundproofed corridors of the Fulton County District Attorney's Office, the air conditioning hums at a freezing, clinical frequency, completely detached from the summer oppression outside. A senior investigator, sitting before a wall of dual-monitor workstations, hits a single stroke on his mechanical keyboard, initiating a final cryptographic hash match that bridges a gap spanning 23 years of absolute silence. On the glowing screen, 2 digitized documents slide into alignment: a faded, handwritten high school graduation yearbook from the spring of 2002, and a stark, high-resolution federal grand jury indictment stamped with the fresh, unyielding purple ink of a capital murder charge. For more than 2 decades, an unseen weight hung over the neat, middle-class lawns of the Cascade Heights neighborhood, a phantom suspicion that warped an entire community's sense of reality, forcing parents to look at their own children with a quiet, lingering dread. Everyone in the city believed the monster who shattered their collective peace in the bleeding autumn of 2003 was a transient ghost, a nameless predator who had slipped off the interstate, struck in the dark, and dissolved back into the massive highway grid of the American South. They never suspected that the true architect of the horror was still walking the very same tree-lined avenues, sitting at the same family dinner tables, and holding a secret so grotesque it was about to incinerate a lifetime of calculated innocence with a single forensic stroke. To comprehend the sheer, bone-chilling impact of this sudden judicial eruption, you have to look past the modern glass high-rises of the current Atlanta skyline and dive directly into the fast-paced, high-intensity landscape of October 2003, an era when the city was vibrating with urban expansion, early 2000s hip-hop booming from custom car stereos, and a rapidly changing demographic that kept the old southern neighborhoods in a state of constant social friction. The air back then smelled of sweet honeysuckle mixed with the sharp, acidic tang of cheap transmission fluid from the thousands of vehicles gridlocked on Interstate 20. It was a place where community meant everything, where families stayed on the same blocks for generations, and where a child's best friend was considered a permanent extension of the household. Then, on the rain-slicked evening of October 24th, the foundational trust of this tight-knit enclave was violently, systematically hollowed out. A young man, a 20-year-old sophomore pre-med student at Morehouse College named Marcus Vance, vanished from his family's brick ranch-style home without a single drop of blood left on the carpet, without a single neighbor hearing a cry for help through the thin pine walls. Marcus wasn't a gambler. He didn't run with the street crews, and his life was a highly disciplined circuit of laboratory lectures, library shifts, and church youth group meetings. When his mother walked into his bedroom the following morning to wake him for an early seminar, she found the bedside lamp still burning, his textbook lying open to a page on human anatomy, and his cellular phone sitting on the desk, its tiny blue screen flashing with missed calls, a digital monument to a sequence of events that had cut his future short in a heartbeat. The immediate investigation that rolled over the precinct was an exercise in absolute, frantic desperation, a chaotic search that exposed a police department completely unequipped to handle a disappearance that left 0 physical entry points. Within hours of the initial missing persons broadcast, the quiet cul-de-sac of Elmwood Terrace was choked with the flashing red and blue strobes of police cruisers, their reflections dancing rhythmically across the wet leaves clogging the storm drains. The lead detective assigned to the case was a veteran homicide lieutenant named Thomas Harris, a man who had spent 30 years processing the visceral reality of street violence, but had never encountered a scene that felt this clinical, this chillingly void of human debris. Marcus's room showed no signs of an intruder. The window locks were secured from the inside, the back door was bolted, and his wallet, keys, and cash were still sitting in his dresser drawer. But when Harris shined his tactical light beneath the rim of the back porch stairs, his beam caught a minute anomaly that made the hair on his arms stand up. A single, micro-sized plastic thread from a specialized tactical cable tie, the kind used by commercial security firms to lock heavy equipment boxes, severed with a clean, singular cut that suggested the execution of a professional restraint protocol. The discovery of that tiny plastic fragment triggered an exhaustive search of every commercial warehouse and industrial sector surrounding the West End, but the momentum of the investigation was instantly paralyzed by the technical boundaries of early 2000s forensic science and a total absence of actionable human intelligence. Detectives worked 16-hour shifts, knocking on the doors of adjacent homes in the pouring rain, interviewing terrified students at the Morehouse campus, but the neighborhood was a wall of silence. The autumn storms had completely washed away any potential tire tracks from the unpaved alleyway behind the Vance property, and the primitive cell tower triangulation of the era could only isolate Marcus's last digital signature to a massive 5-mile radius that spanned the entire industrial shipping corridor of Southwest Atlanta. The local television stations grabbed onto the story, running grainy photos of Marcus in his freshman track uniform beneath sensational, Dawn-Dap headlines that sent a shockwave of profound paranoia through every college dormitory in the state. Students began walking in groups of 4. Residential blocks established armed neighborhood watches within 72 hours, and an eerie, suffocating silence settled over Cascade Heights every time the sun dipped below the tree line, a collective realization that a highly calculated predator was operating within their perimeter, an entity that could bypass deadbolts, extract a grown man from a secured home, and evaporate into the midnight fog without leaving a name or a face. The nightmare reached its grim, Chandong crescendo 3 weeks later when a pair of county land surveyors climbed down into a deep, abandoned granite quarry near the industrial edge of Fulton County, miles outside the residential sectors. It was a bleak, desolate crater of gray stone, filled with pools of stagnant green water and the rusted chassis of stripped vehicles from decades past. When the lead surveyor shined his high-intensity lantern into a narrow cleft at the base of the quarry wall, he didn't find old mining debris. He found Marcus. The body had been hidden with a clinical precision that bordered on military efficiency, wrapped in a heavy industrial nylon tarp that had been secured with multiple bands of the same heavy-duty black cable ties found on his porch. The medical examiner's subsequent autopsy report was a document of pure terror. The cause of death was a systematic, slow mechanical asphyxiation executed with an adjustable ligature device, a method that left 0 defensive wounds on the victim's hands, indicating he had been completely immobilized from the very beginning of the abduction. There was no foreign DNA beneath his fingernails, no foreign fibers on his clothing, no footprint evidence in the rocky quarry. The killer was someone who understood the exact mechanics of forensic collection, someone who knew how to sanitize a body, someone who operated with the cold, detached pulse of an absolute professional. As the years bled into decades, the case file grew thick with dead ends, unverified tips, and the hollow promises of a police department buckling under the weight of a soaring modern crime rate. Detective Thomas Harris spent his final years before retirement in the basement archive room of the complex, surrounded by the scent of old cardboard and fading ink, staring at the glossy photographs of the granite quarry and the severed plastic threads, his mind spinning in a permanent loop of frustration. He interviewed local drifters, known home invasion suspects, and commercial warehouse workers, but every single lead evaporated into thin air, leaving him with nothing but a drawer full of heavily redacted statements and a mounting sense of personal failure. The Vance family slowly dissolved under the crushing weight of the unanswered question. Marcus's father passed away from a sudden stroke within 3 years of the murder, and his mother retreated into a silent, shuttered existence behind locked doors, leaving her son's bedroom exactly as it was on the night he vanished, a dusty, frozen capsule of a life violently stolen from the ledger of the living. By the time the decade turned, the 2003 file was stamped with the cold, bureaucratic red ink of a permanent stalemate, relegated to the highest shelves of the unresolved archives where old murders went to die. Decades passed, and the city underwent a massive, high-speed transformation, its old neighborhoods gentrifying, its analog infrastructure being replaced by a digital matrix, while the forensic science of the future quietly evolved inside the climate-controlled laboratories of a new generation of investigators. The old paper logbooks and physical evidence samples, once stored in standard cardboard boxes, were systematically indexed and fed into the advanced databases of the Federal Cold Case Task Force. In the winter of 2025, a specialized unit operating under an advanced federal mandate pulled the Cascade Heights file from its decades of isolation. They weren't hunting for a miracle. They simply wanted to subject the preserved industrial nylon tarp and the adhesive backing of the original evidence labels to the newly developed MVAC wet vacuum system, a revolutionary technology capable of extracting microscopic skin cell profiles from deep within porous surfaces that regular swabbing could never reach. The breakthrough did not occur with a dramatic siren or a televised press conference. It happened in the middle of a quiet shift inside the state crime lab with a soft, electronic chime from an automated analyzer terminal. The wet vacuum system had successfully penetrated the coarse fibers of the industrial nylon tarp used to wrap Marcus's body, isolating a single, ultra-pure strand of touched DNA that had been trapped beneath the heavy pressure of the plastic cable ties for 23 years. The algorithm didn't just generate a partial profile. It delivered an absolute, undeniable identity, a genetic sequence that slammed into a modern state database with the force of a physical explosion. The DNA did not belong to a transient killer, a career criminal, or an out-of-state drifter. It belonged to a 39-year-old high-profile corporate real estate developer named Julian Ross, a man who was Marcus Vance's childhood best friend, the boy who had lived 3 doors down, the classmate who had delivered the emotional eulogy at Marcus's funeral in November 2003. The realization that the killer was not a faceless ghost, but the victim's closest childhood companion triggered a massive, highly classified operational response from state and federal authorities, who understood that an unmasked predator with significant financial resources is exceptionally dangerous when cornered. For 72 hours, undercover tactical surveillance teams tracked Julian Ross's every movement, watching as the wealthy, polished executive left his luxury penthouse in Midtown, chaired corporate board meetings, and attended high-society charity galas. To the world, he was the definition of Atlanta's new guard, a brilliant self-made success story who had used his intelligence to build an empire. But the behavioral analysts watching him through telephoto lenses saw a different reality, a man who still checked his rearview mirrors with a calculated, obsessive rhythm. A man who scanned the perimeters of every room he entered, a man who had carried the memory of a cold-blooded execution through every single day of his adult life without ever letting his public mask slip. Which brings us directly to the chilling, high-intensity execution of the Midnight Raid, a tactical strike designed to obliterate 23 years of absolute security in a single, explosive heartbeat. The rain is falling in heavy, vertical sheets, turning the glass facade of the Midtown luxury high-rise into a blurred canvas of reflection as a convoy of black, unmarked federal tactical units pulls onto the private driveway without headlights. The heavily armed agents, wearing full body armor, ballistic helmets, and night vision optics, move through the service elevators with the silent precision of a military unit, their weapons raised, their boots making zero sound against the polished marble floor of the penthouse corridor. With a single, deafening impact from a hydraulic breaching tool, the reinforced oak entry door of the luxury apartment is blown off its frame, the interior instantly consumed by the blinding, chaotic strobe of tactical weapon lights and the dawn dap, overlapping commands of federal agents saturating the master bedroom. Julian Ross is pinned to his high-thread Count Egyptian cotton sheets before his eyes can even adjust to the light, his manicured hands forced behind his back as the heavy steel cuffs click shut around his wrists, ending a flight from justice that had lasted nearly a quarter of a century. As the sun begins to rise over the wet, glistening streets of Atlanta, casting a pale, gray light across the luxury high-rise that now serves as a crime scene, the news of the indictment hits the morning news cycles like a physical blow to the heart of the city. The shockwaves are absolute, a profound existential rupture for a community that had spent decades trying to process the loss of Marcus Vance, forcing old friends and neighbors to confront the grotesque, unbelievable reality that the monster was the boy they had comforted, the friend who had wept with the victim's mother on the front porch. The legal battle ahead promises to be a complex, historic confrontation between the limits of circumstantial defense and the absolute, molecular certainty of modern forensic science, a trial that will drag the dark, hidden betrayals of 2003 back into the harsh glare of the public eye. But for the ghost of Marcus Vance, and for an entire neighborhood defined by that terror, the long, freezing night of absolute BTAC is finally over, the silence of the grave replaced at last by the heavy, unyielding strike of a judicial gavel. The transport vehicle moves through the morning gridlock, its tires humming against the wet concrete of the highway as it carries Julian Ross toward the Fulton County Jail. Inside the vehicle, The sound of the city waking up is a distant murmur, a reminder of the world he is officially being expelled from. He does not yell. He does not plead his innocence to the silent agents sitting across from him. He simply stares out the reinforced window at the passing billboards, his face returning to that cold, calculating blankness that had protected him across 2 decades. He knows that the game has fundamentally changed, that the analog shield of the early 2000s has been completely dissolved by the digital lasers of the present, leaving him stripped of his corporate wealth, his social standing, and his freedom. At the old Vance home in Cascade Heights, the morning light catches the dew on the overgrown lawn, where Marcus's mother still lives behind closed blinds. She receives the phone call from the district attorney's office in absolute silence, her hand shaking so violently that the plastic receiver slips from her fingers, clattering against the kitchen floor. The tears that fall from her eyes are not new. They are the continuation of a reservoir of grief that has been standard for 23 years, but today they are laced with a sickening, mind-shattering confusion. The face of the killer running on the television screen is a face she had kissed, a boy she had fed at her own counter, the child she had trusted to protect her son when they were growing up in the dark. The file room at the police headquarters is already bustling with activity as technicians pull the old physical evidence boxes from the high shelves, preparing the chain of custody logs for the grand jury presentation. The folders containing Detective Harris's handwritten notes are unsealed, the fading carbon paper displaying his early, prophetic suspicions about the inner circle of Marcus's friends, suspicions that had been shot down by department brass at the time due to Julian's perfect alibi and affluent family background. The notes are no longer just historical reference points. They are the blueprint for the prosecution, a roadmap of a betrayal that took a lifetime to prove, but less than a second to execute under the unyielding law of modern science. As the morning progression continues, the city's legal community prepares for what will undoubtedly be the trial of the decade, a case that challenges every convention of criminal defense and redefines the power of molecular tracking. The indictment is read over the local airwaves with a rapid, dawn-dap rhythm that leaves the listeners paralyzed in their cars, their eyes fixed on the highway ahead as they try to process the depth of the deception. The name Julian Ross is no longer associated with luxury real estate or civic philanthropy. It is permanently welded to the phrase "cold case solved," a linguistic anchor that will drag his memory down into the darkest corners of Georgia's judicial history, ensuring that the truth, no matter how long it takes to grow, will always find its way back to the surface. The concrete walls of the holding facility are cold, a sharp contrast to the luxury penthouse Ross had occupied just hours earlier. As he is processed into the system, his custom Italian suit is confiscated, replaced by the uniform of the state, the drab, oversized orange jumpsuit that strips away every marker of his executive success. He stands before the booking camera, the electronic flash illuminating the hard, unyielding lines of his jaw, a permanent digital record of his ultimate downfall. The cell door slides shut with a heavy, mechanical clang that echoes down the tier, a sound that marks the definitive commencement of his prosecution, leaving him alone in the dark with the ghost of the boy he left in the granite quarry 23 years ago. The iron door of the transport van slams shut with a heavy, concussive boom that echoes through the subterranean processing garage of the Fulton County Jail, a sound that marks the definitive end of Lucas Thorne's 2-decade illusion of absolute safety. Outside, the midday Atlanta heat is turning the city into a suffocating pressure cooker, but inside the concrete processing terminal, the air is dead, thin, and smelling of industrial disinfectant and old panic. Lucas stands under the glare of a single unblinking security light, his custom-tailored linen shirt wrinkled and stained with sweat, his leather loafers scuffing against the grime of the concrete floor. He does not scream, he does not demand to speak with his corporate attorneys, and he does not look at the armed deputies flanking his silhouette. He simply stares straight ahead at the flaking gray paint of the booking desk, his breath coming in shallow, ragged bursts as the reality of his downfall begins to settle into his bones like lead. For 23 years, this man operated under the total, unshakable belief that the swampy banks of the Chattahoochee River had swallowed his secret whole, that the heavy mud and the passage of time had successfully rotted away any physical evidence linking his hands to the execution of his childhood best friend. But as a guard steps forward with a pair of oversized, standard-issue bright orange inmate scrubs, the modern world closes its teeth around him, proving that time is no longer a shield for the guilty and that the microscopic markers of the past are entirely patient. The transition into the high-security administrative segregation wing is a cold, calculated stripping away of the immense wealth and privilege Lucas had spent his adult life accumulating. He is led down a labyrinth of reinforced steel corridors where the mechanical clanging of automated tier doors creates a deafening, industrial rhythm that obliterates human identity. Every step he takes in his heavy jail-issued rubber sandals is tracked by overhead lenses, his new status as a high-profile cold case defendant making him an immediate target for the general population. He is pushed into cell 412, a narrow, windowless 6-by-9-foot vault of solid concrete, a stainless steel combination sink and toilet, and a thin, vinyl-covered mattress resting on a metal slab bolted directly into the wall. When the heavy iron door slides into its track with a final, echoing crash, the absolute silence that follows is terrifying, a vast psychological vacuum where there are no real estate developments to manage, no high society galas to attend, and no comforting illusions to hide behind. There is only the harsh, shadowless buzz of a fluorescent bulb that will stay lit 24 hours a day, leaving him completely exposed to the ghosts he had spent half a century trying to forget. On the small concrete shelf next to his bunk lies a thick, black, 3-ring binder dropped off by his public defender just hours after the midnight raid, the state's initial discovery exhibit packet, a clinical documentation of his own undoing. Lucas sits on the edge of the mattress, his hands shaking slightly as he opens the binder, his eyes scanning the dense rows of laboratory charts, chemical breakdowns, and high-definition digital lift reports. He does not read the pages as a man looking for salvation. He analyzes them with the hyper-focused, critical gaze of a developer looking for a structural defect in a foundation blueprint. For 20 years, his success in the Atlanta real estate market was built on his ability to find the hidden vulnerabilities in contracts, to exploit the blind spots of zoning boards, and to manipulate the narrative to his advantage. But as his fingers turn the pages of the forensic report, he realizes that the language of modern molecular science contains no loopholes, no gray areas, and no room for financial leverage. The core of the state's case, as laid out in the terrifyingly precise text of the exhibit, rests entirely on the absolute physical preservation of the silver duct tape that had bound Marcus Vance's body in the winter of 2003. In the immediate aftermath of the recovery, the original homicide detectives had focused their primitive testing on the exterior surface of the plastic wrapping, searching for standard latent prints or hair fragments that the river mud had long since destroyed. The tape was deemed a dead end, an analog relic that was logged into a specialized cardboard box and transferred to the county's long-term climate-controlled repository in East Point. But the data didn't decay. In June 2026, the newly formed Federal Cold Case Task Force utilized a revolutionary forensic extraction process known as laser-induced breakdown spectroscopy to penetrate the microscopic, multi-layered adhesive backing of the tape without disturbing the underlying physical matrix. The laser didn't just clean the surface, it mapped the chemical sublayers of the glue, isolating a pristine, encapsulated thumbprint, and a concentrated cluster of epithelial skin cells that had been trapped in the adhesive since the moment the tape was ripped from the roll. Lucas's jaw tightens until his teeth ache as he stares at the digital magnification of his own skin ridges projected onto the printed chart before him. The green digital alignment indicators marking the point-by-point biometric matches look like a constellation of stars, a permanent, unalterable map of his own betrayal that he had carelessly left behind when he was 18 years old. He remembers that humid June night with a clarity that the passage of decades had never been able to dull, no matter how many millions of dollars he spent trying to drown it out. He remembers the thick, suffocating smell of the pine trees behind the Vance home, the low, mechanical hum of the desk fan inside Marcus's bedroom, and the sharp, metallic snap of the silver tape as he pulled it taut against the industrial plastic wrapping in the dark. He had been so meticulous. He had worn gloves during the abduction, He had scrubbed the bedroom window frame with bleach, and he had chosen a burial site so deep in the Chattahoochee wilderness that it required a 2-mile hike through dense briars to reach it. He had outsmarted the detectives of 2003 because their systems were slow, blind, and overwhelmed by the city's soaring summer crime rates. But he had forgotten that science does not run on a statute of limitations, and that the sticky glue of a standard roll of utility tape would serve as an unyielding time capsule, holding his biological signature intact across a generation of human history until the world was ready to read it. While Lucas sits in the absolute, freezing isolation of Cell 412, the world outside the prison walls is experiencing an absolute media firestorm that is tearing through the affluent suburbs of Buckhead like an existential earthquake. The morning news broadcasts lead with a shocking footage of the midnight raid, the anchors' voices carrying a mixture of profound disbelief and urgency as they read the details of the indictment. Atlanta 2003 cold case solved. Victim's childhood best friend indicted. In the quiet, tree-lined cul-de-sac where the Vance and Thorne families had lived side by side for decades, residents stand on their manicured lawns in the heavy summer heat, watching in paralyzed silence as a fleet of unmarked federal vans and forensic units surround Lucas's multi-million-dollar estate, sealing the entire property behind a perimeter of bright yellow crime scene tape. The older generation of Buckhead residents, those who had lived through the terrifying, paranoid summer of 2003, are suddenly plunged into a vivid state of retrospective trauma. They remember the suffocating fear that had gripped their households after Marcus vanished, the frantic installation of high-end home security systems, and the way parents began looking at every passing stranger with deep, defensive suspicion. For 23 years, they had comforted themselves with a narrative that Marcus had been the victim of a random, transient predator, a drifter passing through on the interstate who had targeted the neighborhood by chance before vanishing back into the wind. Now, they are forced to confront a reality that is infinitely more grotesque. The monster wasn't a stranger lurking in the dark. The predator was the golden boy from 3 doors down, the charismatic teenager who had grown up inside their homes, who had played basketball in their driveways, and who had stood on their lawns weeping tears of synthetic grief while holding a candle at Marcus's memorial vigil. At the Fulton County Police Headquarters, the original investigative notebooks of Detective Frank Reyes are being systematically digitized by the Cold Case Task Force, revealing a tragic, historical tapestry of a department that had been completely blindfolded by the killer's proximity to the heart of the tragedy. Reyes's field notes from the summer of 2003 describe a teenage Lucas Thorne who was constantly present at the center of the operational command, volunteering to coordinate student search parties, distributing missing person flyers across the university campuses, and acting as a primary liaison between the police department and Marcus's devastated mother. Lucas had utilized his status as the grieving best friend to embed himself directly inside the flow of the active investigation, using his access to monitor the detectives' progress, to steer their suspicions away from the neighborhood, and to ensure that his own absolute security remained undisturbed while the trail went cold. Inside the high-security consultation room of the jail, the state's lead prosecutor, a formidable assistant district attorney named Catherine Vance, no relation to the victim, ironically, sits across from Lucas's high-priced defense team, her face an unreadable mask of professional certitude. She doesn't offer room for negotiation or plea bargains. She simply places a secondary file on the metal table, her eyes locked on Lucas's lead counsel. "We didn't just stop at the fingerprint trapped in the tape. Counselor," she says, her voice low, resonant, and entirely steady. "Once the laser sequencing gave us Lucas's biological profile, we unspooled his family's historical maintenance records from the summer of 2003. We looked at his father's commercial aviation logistics company based out of DeKalb Peachtree Airport. Do you know what we found? We found that in June 2003, that specific hangar held an exclusive regional distribution contract for the exact brand of reinforced, high-tensile silver duct tape recovered from the river burial site, a tape that was coated with a specific polymer compound used only on commercial aircraft wings. Your client didn't buy that tape at a hardware store. He stole it from his own father's inventory to wrap his best friend's body." The defense attorneys do not speak immediately. their faces hardening as the circumstantial data begins to interlock with the molecular science, forming an inescapable chronological cage around their client. They realize that the very privilege that had protected Lucas for 23 years, his family's wealth, his high-level corporate connections, his unblemished social standing, has been converted into the primary engine of his destruction, providing the prosecution with a clear, undeniable line of physical access to the instruments of the crime. The narrative of childhood loyalty is completely dead, replaced by a dark, clinical record of an obsession that had been hidden behind a smile for half a century, leaving the defense with no alternative but to launch a savage, scorched earth campaign to challenge the constitutional validity of the laser technology itself before the historic trial can even commence. As the daylight fades over the high concrete towers of the county jail, casting long, bloody shadows across the sterile corridors of the processing wing, the city of Atlanta faces a profound, lingering confrontation with its own historical ghost. The collective psyche of the community remains trapped in a state of suspended animation, a dark realization that the passage of time is no longer a guarantee of peace, and that the shadows of the past possess the capability to reach across 2 decades to drag the truth into the light, forcing an entire generation to answer for the betrayal they spent a lifetime trying to bury in the dirt. The quiet hours of the graveyard shift inside the administrative segregation unit bring no relief to the terminal structural collapse of Lucas Thorne's composure. The closed-circuit security monitors inside the guard station capture him sitting completely motionless on the edge of his narrow bunk at 3 a.m., his tailored shirt cast aside, his bare shoulders pressed against the freezing concrete wall as he stares intently at his own fingers. His lips are moving in a rapid, silent, and frantic mutter, a low, rhythmic recitation of old track times, high school schedules, and the specific geographic turnoffs along the Chattahoochee River Highway, a maddening loop of a memory that has finally transformed from his secret sanctuary into his permanent prison. He refuses to consume the standard jail rations, his physical frame beginning to shrink noticeably under the intense, shadowless glare of the fluorescent light, the grandfather clock of justice ticking down the minutes until his opening statement where the mask he wore for 23 years will be violently ripped away from his face forever. The prosecution team uses this final midnight window to finalize their master presentation, locking each piece of digital evidence into an airtight, interactive timeline that will leave no room for alternative explanations when the jury takes the box. They have built a comprehensive 3-dimensional digital model of the Buckhead neighborhood from June 2003, tracking the exact coordinates of the Thorne and Vance residences to demonstrate the chilling physical proximity of the predator to his prey. Every document, every gate log from the aviation hangar, and every pixel of the laser-lifted print is cross-referenced with a specific minute on the historical grid, creating an inescapable net that will drag Lucas Thorne from his multi-million-dollar estate directly to the absolute finality of a life sentence, without the possibility of parole. As the first winter fog of the changing season begins to roll over the sprawling canopy of the North Georgia woods, swallowing the banks of the Chattahoochee River in a cold, gray embrace, both sides prepare for the commencement of the full criminal prosecution, a historic confrontation where the illusions of privilege will be weighed against the absolute certainty of modern molecular evolution, and where a mother's 23-year night of unyielding agony will finally face its definitive, thunderous conclusion. The transition from the high-security administrative segregation wing of the Fulton County Jail to the grand, limestone-clad chambers of the Fulton County Superior Court in downtown Atlanta is a brutal, high-velocity plunge into the blinding glare of a modern media circus. It is a suffocatingly hot July morning in 2026, and the historic plaza surrounding the courthouse on Pryor Street has been completely transformed into a high-density television production village. A phalanx of county sheriffs and state troopers stands shoulder to shoulder behind heavy steel crowd control barricades, managing a surging, volatile crowd of local residents, legal analysts, and true crime reporters who have descended upon the municipal center to witness the official unmasking of a suburban phantom. When the armored transport vehicle pulls into the secured underground Sally Port, the massive iron gate slams shut with an echoing, concussive boom that vibrates through the concrete foundation, a sound that marks the definitive end of Lucas Thorne's physical liberty. He is led up the rear elevator in heavy ankle shackles, the rhythmic, metallic clinking of the iron chains sounding like a ticking clock, a stark contrast to the quiet, entitled footsteps he had taken through his corporate real estate offices just days earlier. Inside courtroom 4A, the atmospheric tension is heavy, the air conditioned to a sterile, freezing intensity that does not diminish the suffocating scent of wet umbrellas, nervous sweat, and collective anxiety. Every single oak bench in the public gallery is packed to its absolute physical capacity, leaving no standing room. In the very front row, sitting with a rigid, heartbreaking posture, is Eleanor Vance, Marcus's surviving mother. Her fragile frame is wrapped in a dark wool shawl despite the summer heat, her thin hands trembling as she clutches a small, framed photograph of her son from his high school graduation, his bright, ambitious eyes staring out at a room that had forgotten him for 23 years. When the side door opens and Lucas Thorne is led into the well of the courtroom, a collective, audible gasp ripples through the crowd like a wave of electricity. Seeing him in the stark, oversized orange inmate jumpsuit, without his signature designer blazers or his expensive luxury watch, strips away the last remnants of his multi-million-dollar developer persona. He looks shockingly smaller, an old 18-year-old boy whose charismatic mask has been violently peeled back, his gaze fixed firmly on the polished wood of the defense table, completely refusing to turn his head toward the gallery or the battery of cameras tracking his every micro-movement. The Superior Court judge takes the bench, the sharp, authoritative strike of his wooden gavel cutting through the low murmur of the room like a gunshot. The proceeding is a high-stakes legal exercise designed to formally establish the state's intent to prosecute a crime that has been frozen in time since the sweltering summer of 2003. The lead prosecutor, Catherine Vance, stands at the podium, her posture commanding, her voice carrying a cold, resonant authority that immediately fills the room. She does not begin with an emotional speech. She begins with the hard, clinical reading of the criminal indictment into the record. The words hit the silent room with a sickening, visceral force. The state of Georgia officially charges Lucas Thorne with 1 count of malice murder, felony murder, kidnapping, and aggravated assault in connection with the June 2003 disappearance and execution of Marcus Vance. As Catherine reads through the newly uncovered forensic details, the point-by-point digital match of the thumbprint trapped beneath the adhesive layer of the silver aviation tape, the chemical analysis of the polymer compound tracking back to his father's airport hangar, the sheer, cold-blooded calculation of the crime becomes undeniable. Lucas's lead defense attorney, a prominent, high-priced white-collar fixer named Richard Sterling, stands at his table, his voice booming through the courtroom sound system as he attempts to mount an immediate challenge to the state's aggressive posture. He argues for a reasonable bond, citing his client's total lack of a prior criminal record, his massive economic investments in the Atlanta metropolitan area, and his deep, unchanging roots in the local philanthropic community. Mr. Thorne is a highly respected business leader, Sterling states, his hand gesturing toward the quiet, shaking figure sitting next to him. He has lived in Fulton County his entire life, employing hundreds of citizens and contributing millions to local charities. To hold a prominent citizen without bond based entirely on a single piece of 23-year-old physical evidence that has sat in a dusty, unregulated storage locker for decades is an egregious violation of his constitutional rights. But the prosecutor fires back instantly, her voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register that leaves zero room for compromise. The state is not prosecuting the successful developer sitting at that table today, Your Honor, Catherine Vance declares, pointing a steady finger across the aisle. We are prosecuting the 18-year-old predator who used his childhood intimacy to breach a sanctuary, who led his best friend into the dark, executed him with a single bullet to the back of the skull, and then wrapped his body in industrial plastic like a piece of construction debris. The evidence against this defendant is not a circumstantial theory. It is a permanent, digital molecular signature trapped in the adhesive glue of the very tape he used to bind his victim. He has successfully evaded the scales of justice for 23 years, living a life of absolute luxury that Marcus Vance was ruthlessly denied, all while comforting the very mother he left broken in the dirt. He represents a supreme flight risk and a profound danger to the integrity of this historic process. The state requests that he be remanded into custody without bail. The judge does not hesitate. He reviews the confidential forensic reports and the aviation gate logs submitted by the Cold Case Task Force, his face an unreadable mask of solemn gravity. With a sharp, final strike of his gavel, bond is officially denied. Lucas Thorne is remanded to the high-security wing of the Fulton County Jail, ordered to be held in administrative segregation until his formal preliminary examination. As the sheriff stepped forward to lead him out of the courtroom, Lucas's eyes briefly sweep past the front row of the gallery, his cold, vacant gaze colliding for a fraction of a second with the tear-streaked face of Marcus's mother. There is no remorse in his expression, no silent plea for forgiveness. There is only the flat, calculating detachment of an old operator who has finally run out of paths to run down. While the legal battle lines are drawn in downtown Atlanta, a massive secondary crisis is unfolding within the historical archives of the local municipal departments and the corporate records of the aviation facility where Lucas spent his youth. The realization that an active, high-level homicide suspect managed to hide in plain sight for over 2 decades while leveraging his family's access to the city's transportation infrastructure has triggered an unprecedented, independent audit overseen by the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. A specialized team of modern forensic accountants and cold case investigators has locked down the old maintenance logs and personnel records storage facilities at DeKalb Peachtree Airport, systematically digitizing thousands of old log sheets, security clearings, and supply inventory reports from the early 2000s. The burning question hanging over the entire state legal establishment is a terrifying one. Was Marcus Vance an isolated victim of a teenage obsession, or was Lucas Thorne a prolific, shadow predator who used the vast, dense wilderness areas surrounding the North Georgia river networks as his personal hunting ground? Investigators begin mapping Lucas's personal land acquisition history against a grim, historical database of unsolved disappearances and cold case homicides that occurred across the region between 2000 and 2010. They discover a pattern of chilling anomalies. During 3 separate periods when Lucas's development firm was surveying isolated, rural parcels of land near the Chattahoochee and Oconee rivers, parcels that were subsequently cleared for luxury subdivisions, 3 other young college students vanished from nearby towns without a trace. None of those cases were ever solved, their files sitting in the same dusty archives where Marcus's case had languished for decades. The physical geography of the city itself begins to take on a hostile, menacing tone for its residents. The quiet, tree-lined cul-de-sacs of Buckhead and the vast, dense wilderness sectors that line the river corridors are no longer viewed merely as symbols of affluent southern charm. They are now recognized as the protective camouflage that allowed a killer to survive across generations. The neighborhood where Lucas lived out his prosperous adult life is paralyzed by a collective sense of profound betrayal. Neighbors who had shared golf carts with him, who had invited him to exclusive country club dinners, and whose children had played in his pool are forced to look back at their own history through a distorted, sickening lens. Every kind gesture he made, every charitable donation he signed, is now stained by the realization that he was carrying the memory of an execution inside his chest every single day. Back in his concrete cell at the county jail, Lucas Thorne is experiencing the brutal reality of an institution that does not care about his wealth or his corporate status. He is placed on a strict 23-hour lockdown schedule, isolated from the general inmate population for his own protection, as a high-profile cold case killer would be an immediate target for violence in any prison block. The space is tiny, a 6-by-9-foot box of reinforced concrete, a stainless steel toilet, and a narrow bunk that offers no comfort to his body. The continuous, industrial hum of the ventilation system and the distant, mechanical clanging of heavy steel tier doors are the only sounds that penetrate his isolation. According to internal jail logs, Lucas has entered a state of profound psychological retreat. He sits on the edge of his bunk for hours, his head bowed, his hands clasped between his knees, staring intently at the concrete floor as if he can see the ridges of his own thumbprint tracing their way across the stone. He refuses the standard jail meals, consuming only small amounts of water, his physical frame shrinking noticeably with each passing hour as the reality of his confinement begins to crush his spirit. Yet, whenever his defense team arrives in the secure attorney consultation room, the frailty instantly vanishes, replaced by a sharp, demanding precision as he reviews the copies of the digital forensic files, searching desperately for a single administrative flaw, a single broken chain of custody, a single legal technicality that can blow the state's case wide open before the trial can even begin. The legal war ahead promises to be an absolute vivisection of a town's elite inner circle, exposing the terrifying ease with which privilege can cloak the most monstrous actions. As the winter fog begins to roll off the Piedmont Plateau, settling low over the dark waters of the Chattahoochee River, the city of Atlanta waits in a state of paralyzed suspense, knowing that the ghost of 2003 is no longer a silent memory, and that the scales of justice are finally grinding toward a definitive, thunderous conclusion. The concrete structure of the Fulton County Jail's administrative segregation wing remains insulated from the changing climate of downtown Atlanta, maintaining a cold, mechanical hum that serves as a permanent baseline to Lucas Thorne's confinement. It is late July 2026, and the humid external air cannot penetrate the reinforced steel thresholds where the former real estate mogul sits. Inside cell 412, the mundane details of a life built on absolute privilege have been completely erased. There are no high-level boardrooms, no architectural models of multi-million-dollar developments, and no executive leather chairs. There is only a fixed steel shelf, a concrete bunk slab, and the unyielding glare of a security bulb that leaves no corner of the room in darkness. For a man who spent 23 years operating under the total, unquestioned assumption that he had outsmarted both the local homicide department and the natural progression of time, this total reduction of physical space is a brutal psychological crucible. Lucas sits with his spine pressed against a cold stone wall, his gaze fixed on the thick, black Discovery binder that represents the state's forensic offensive. For nearly a quarter of a century, his memory had been a carefully managed ledger, a sanctuary where the events of June 18, 2003, were buried beneath layers of corporate philanthropy and suburban respectability. He had convinced himself that the vast, rapid expansion of the Atlanta metropolitan area had successfully swallowed his past, that the commercial restructuring of the North Georgia corridors and the digital migration of police databases had rendered him completely invisible to the scales of justice. But as he listens to the rhythmic, heavy footsteps of the guards pacing the tier outside his door, he is forced to confront a reality that cannot be negotiated. The modern legal system does not rely on analog memories. It runs on data, on pixels, and on the unyielding molecular permanence of modern forensic science. Vance turns the pages of the Discovery packet with a slow, agonizing precision, his eyes tracking the dense columns of laboratory charts, chemical breakdowns, and laser-lifting diagnostics. He analyzes the text not as an inmate facing the terrifying reality of a life sentence without parole, but as a master developer searching for a structural vulnerability in an opponent's construction blueprint. For 2 decades, his dominance in the regional property market was built entirely on his capability to locate the hidden blind spots in contracts, to exploit the bureaucratic oversight of planning committees, and to utilize his immense family leverage to rewrite the narrative. But as his fingers map the lines of the federal cold case dossier, he realizes that the language of advanced molecular sequencing contains no ambiguity, no administrative loopholes, and no room for financial manipulation. The foundation of the state's prosecution, as detailed in the clinical text before him, rests completely on the microscopic preservation of the silver duct tape that had wrapped Marcus Vance's body in the winter of 2003. In the immediate aftermath of the recovery, the original detectives had been blinded by the physical chaos of the riverbank, focusing their primitive testing on the exterior plastic drop cloths, which the heavy current and organic silt had long since stripped of actionable trace data. The tape had been logged as a secondary exhibit, an analog relic that sat undisturbed inside an airtight preservation bag within the county's long-term storage repository in East Point. But the biological material didn't decay. In June 2026, the specialized federal task force utilized laser-induced breakdown spectroscopy to penetrate the chemical layers of the degraded adhesive without altering the underlying physical matrix of the nylon weave. The automated scanning sequence didn't just clean the image, it mapped the subsurface composition of the glue, isolating a pristine latent thumbprint and a concentrated cluster of epithelial skin cells that had been trapped in the vacuum-sealed vacuum since the moment the roll was ripped apart. Lucas's jaw tightens until his muscles ache as he stares at the digital magnification of his own thumbprint projected onto the center of the white page. The green digital markers isolating the matching ridge characteristics look like a coordinate grid, a permanent, inescapable map of a childhood execution that he had carelessly left behind when he was 18 years old. He remembers that suffocatingly humid night with a clarity that the passage of decades had never been able to diminish, no matter how many millions of dollars he spent constructing an alternative reality. He remembers the thick, sweet scent of the Georgia pines behind the Vance home, the low hum of the desk fan inside Marcus's bedroom, and the sharp, distinct snap of the high-tensile silver tape as he pulled it taut in the dark woods near the riverbank. He had been so careful. He had worn surgical gloves during the initial entry, he had scrubbed the windowsill with industrial cleaners, and he had chosen a burial site so deep in the Chattahoochee wilderness that it had remained hidden through 23 seasons of rain and decay. He had beaten the detectives of 2003 because their department was overwhelmed by an unprecedented summer crime wave and primitive investigative software. But he had forgotten that science does not operate on an administrative clock, and that the sticky adhesive of a standard roll of utility tape would serve as an unyielding time capsule, holding his biological signature intact across a generation of human history until the world was finally ready to read it. While Lucas remains locked inside the absolute, sterile silence of his cell, the city outside the prison walls is experiencing an unprecedented social and institutional rupture that is tearing through the elite echelons of Atlanta society like an earthquake. The morning news broadcasts continue to dominate the airwaves with footage of the midnight raid, the anchors' voices carrying a mixture of profound shock and urgency as they read the details of the shifting case. Atlanta 2003 cold case solved. Victim's childhood best friend indicted. In the exclusive, tree-lined country club communities of Buckhead, where the Thorne family had maintained their historical presence, residents stand on their manicured lawns in the heavy summer heat, watching in paralyzed silence as a fleet of unmarked federal vehicles and state forensic units surround Lucas's corporate headquarters, sealing the executive suites behind miles of bright yellow crime scene tape. The older generation of regional leaders, those who had lived through the frantic, terrifying summer of 2003, are suddenly plunged into a vivid state of retrospective trauma. They remember the paralyzing fear that had gripped every household after the golden boy of the neighborhood vanished without a single trace of forced entry, the immediate installation of advanced security systems, and the way parents began looking at every passing vehicle with defensive suspicion. For 23 years, they had comforted themselves with a clean, convenient narrative that Marcus Vance had been the victim of a random, transient predator, a drifter passing through on the interstate who had targeted the affluent suburb by chance before vanishing back into the deep woods. Now, they are forced to confront an institutional reality that is infinitely more grotesque. The monster wasn't an outsider lurking in the shadows of the highways. The predator was the closest companion from 3 doors down, the charismatic teenager who had shared their family dinners, who had stayed in their guest rooms, and who had stood on their lawns weeping tears of synthetic grief while holding a candle at Marcus's memorial vigil. At the Fulton County Police Headquarters, the original investigative notebooks of Detective Frank Reyes are being systematically digitized by the Cold Case Task Force, revealing a tragic historical pattern of a department that had been completely blindfolded by the killer's proximity to the heart of the tragedy. Reyes's field notes from the summer of 2003 describe a teenage Lucas Thorne who was constantly present at the center of the operational command, volunteering to coordinate student search parties, distributing missing person flyers across the university campuses, and acting as a primary psychological buffer between the police department and Marcus's devastated mother. Lucas had utilized his status as the grieving best friend to embed himself directly inside the flow of the active investigation, using his access to monitor the detectives' progress, to steer their suspicions away from the immediate neighborhood, and to ensure that his own absolute security remained undisturbed while the trail went cold. Inside the high-security consultation room of the jail, Catherine Vance sits across from Lucas's high-priced defense team, her face an unreadable mask of professional certitude. She doesn't offer room for negotiation or plea bargains. She simply places a secondary file on the metal table, her eyes locked on Lucas's lead counsel. "We didn't just stop at the fingerprint trapped in the tape, counselor," she says, her voice low, resonant, and entirely steady. "Once the laser sequencing gave us Lucas's biological profile, we unspooled his family's historical maintenance records from the summer of 2003. We looked at his father's commercial aviation logistics company based out of DeKalb Peachtree Airport. Do you know what we found? We found that in June 2003, that specific hangar held an exclusive regional distribution contract for the exact brand of reinforced, high-tensile silver duct tape recovered from the river burial site, a tape that was coated with a specific polymer compound used only on commercial aircraft wings. Your client didn't buy that tape at a hardware store. He stole it from his own father's inventory to wrap his best friend's body." The defense attorneys do not speak immediately, their faces hardening as the circumstantial data begins to interlock with the molecular science, forming an inescapable chronological cage around their client. They realize that the very privilege that had protected Lucas for 23 years, his family's wealth, his high-level corporate connections, his unblemished social standing, has been converted into the primary engine of his destruction, providing the prosecution with a clear, undeniable line of physical access to the instruments of the crime. The narrative of childhood loyalty is completely dead, replaced by a dark, clinical record of an obsession that had been hidden behind a smile for half a century, leaving the defense with no alternative but to launch a savage, scorched earth campaign to challenge the constitutional validity of the laser technology itself before the historic trial can even commence. As the daylight fades over the high concrete towers of the county jail, casting long, bloody shadows across the sterile corridors of the processing wing, the city of Atlanta faces a profound, lingering confrontation with its own historical ghost. The collective psyche of the community remains trapped in a state of suspended animation, a dark realization that the passage of time is no longer a guarantee of peace, and that the shadows of the past possess the capability to reach across 2 decades to drag the truth into the light, forcing an entire generation to answer for the betrayal they spent a lifetime trying to bury in the dirt. The quiet hours of the graveyard shift inside the administrative segregation unit bring no relief to the terminal structural collapse of Lucas Thorne's composure. The closed-circuit security monitors inside the guard station capture him sitting completely motionless on the edge of his narrow bunk at 3 a.m., his tailored shirt cast aside, his bare shoulders pressed against the freezing concrete wall as he stares intently at his own fingers. His lips are moving in a rapid, silent, and frantic mutter, a low, rhythmic recitation of old track times, high school schedules, and the specific geographic turnoffs along the Chattahoochee River Highway, a maddening loop of a memory that has finally transformed from his secret sanctuary into his permanent prison. He refuses to consume the standard jail rations, his physical frame beginning to shrink noticeably under the intense, shadowless glare of the fluorescent light, the grandfather clock of justice ticking down the minutes until his opening statement where the mask he wore for 23 years will be violently ripped away from his face forever. The prosecution team uses this final midnight window to finalize their master presentation, locking each piece of digital evidence into an airtight, interactive timeline that will leave no room for alternative explanations when the jury takes the box. They have built a comprehensive 3-dimensional digital model of the Buckhead neighborhood from June 2003, tracking the exact coordinates of the Thorne and Vance residences to demonstrate the chilling physical proximity of the predator to his prey. Every document, every gate log from the aviation hangar, and every pixel of the laser-lifted print is cross-referenced with a specific minute on the historical grid, creating an inescapable net that will drag Lucas Thorne from his multi-million-dollar estate directly to the absolute finality of a life sentence without the possibility of parole. As the first winter fog of the changing season begins to roll over the sprawling canopy of the North Georgia woods, swallowing the banks of the Chattahoochee River in a cold, gray embrace. Both sides prepare for the commencement of the full criminal prosecution, a historic confrontation where the illusions of privilege will be weighed against the absolute certainty of modern molecular evolution, and where a mother's 23-year night of unyielding agony will finally face its definitive, thunderous conclusion. The cold air conditioning inside the Fulton County Superior Court offers no comfort to the man sitting at the defense table. It is early August 2026, and the high-velocity legal machinery of the state of Georgia is moving toward its first major public collision. Inside his 6-by-9-foot concrete vault at the county jail, Lucas Thorne had spent the final 48 hours of the pretrial window studying the state's forensic dossiers under the unblinking eye of the overhead security camera, his mind analyzing the data loops with the critical, clinical precision of a real estate developer reviewing an adverse structural survey. He understood that the Federal Cold Case Task Force had built a chronological cage around his history, using the modern sorcery of subsurface laser lifting to turn a 23-year-old partial smear into an absolute courtroom trap. But Thorne also knew that in a court of law, data is only as strong as the human chain that carried it across the decades, and he was counting on his high-priced white-collar defense firm to find the single administrative fracture that could tear the government's case to pieces. Outside the municipal building on Pryor Street, the morning of the formal preliminary examination arrives with the suffocating, heavy heat of a deep southern summer. The streets surrounding the courthouse complex are blocked off by concrete security barriers and a phalanx of county sheriffs, their boots crunching against the dry pavement. The historic plaza has been converted into an absolute jungle of high-definition media equipment, massive broadcast vans with telescoping satellite arrays, bundles of heavy black power cables snaking through the bushes, and teams of field reporters adjusting their microphones as they deliver live, breathless updates to the national feeds. The public gallery inside Courtroom 4A is packed to its absolute physical limits hours before the judge takes the bench, the air thick with a collective, anxious anticipation that makes every breath feel heavy. When Lucas Thorne is led through the side door by 2 armed deputies, a heavy, suffocating silence falls over the chamber. He is wearing his dark navy civilian suit, a calculated wardrobe choice designed by his lead defense counsel, Richard Sterling, to strip away the visual taint of the orange inmate scrubs and re-establish his persona as a respectable, elite member of Atlanta society. He carries a small manila folder containing his personal notes, his spine straight, his face an unreadable mask of stoic detachment as he navigates the gauntlet of flashing camera lenses and whispered curses from the gallery. He does not look at the front row, where Eleanor Vance sits shoulder to shoulder with her surviving family members, her eyes burning into a silhouette with a fury that has been building since the sweltering night of June 18, 2003. The proceeding is called to order by Superior Court Judge Thomas Henderson, a veteran jurist known for his unyielding adherence to procedural precision and his intolerance for courtroom theatrics. The preliminary examination is a high-stakes evidentiary gateway where the prosecution must present sufficient core evidence to satisfy the court that a felony was committed and that probable cause links the defendant directly to the violence. If Catherine Vance can clear this judicial hurdle, Lucas Thorne will be officially bound over for a full criminal prosecution before a 12-person jury. If she fails, the case that took 23 years to solve will evaporate in a single heartbeat. Catherine Vance takes the podium for the state, her posture commanding, her voice carrying a cold, resonant authority that immediately fills the room. She does not begin with a dramatic speech. She begins with a digital timeline. She utilizes a massive, high-definition projection screen that fills the stone wall behind the witness stand, displaying a synchronized, minute-by-minute mapping of June 18, 2003. Your Honor, the prosecutor begins, her eyes fixed on the court clerk. The government is prepared to demonstrate that the disappearance of Marcus Vance was not a mystery solved by coincidence, but an execution tracked by science. We will show that the defendant utilized his intimate childhood proximity and his specialized family access to the aviation logistics infrastructure of this city to target, abduct, and conceal his closest companion, leaving behind a forensic signature that has survived the decay of time, the humidity of the riverbank, and the shifting dynamics of this community. The prosecution calls its first witness, Dr. Eris Thorne, no relation to the defendant, the chief forensic pathologist and molecular chemist who oversaw the re-examination of the 2003 evidence locker. The scientist takes the stand with the calm, academic certitude of a scholar who deals in absolute mathematical probabilities. Under direct examination, he details the physical condition of the airtight evidence bag that had held the silver duct tape artifacts since the body was recovered near the Chattahoochee River. He explains how his team utilized laser-induced breakdown spectroscopy to penetrate the chemical layers of degraded adhesive residue that had covered the latent print for 23 years. The integrity of the sample was extraordinary, Dr. Thorne testifies, using a digital pointer to highlight a massive magnification of the skin ridges on the screen. Because the silver tape had been folded over itself during the binding of the plastic drop cloth, the inner adhesive layer was effectively vacuum sealed, protecting the biological skin cell matrix from oxidation, moisture, and microbial degradation for over 2 decades. When we introduced the high-intensity laser sequencing, we were able to map over 200 separate minutiae points. This is not a circumstantial similarity, Your Honor. This is a point-by-point biometric match that connects the thumb of Lucas Thorne directly to the adhesive material used to secure the victim's shroud. Richard Sterling stands at the defense table, his voice cutting through the clinical atmosphere of the room with a sharp, combative edge. He launches an immediate, aggressive cross-examination of the geneticist, targeting the vulnerability that has defined cold case litigations for a generation, the potential for contamination during the long decades when the evidence sat in analog storage facilities. Dr. Thorne, Sterling begins, stepping into the well of the courtroom. You testified about the preservation pouch being extraordinary. But let's look at the official property room logs from the Fulton County Repository between 2003 and 2010. Isn't it true that during the facility renovation of 2006, thousands of boxes were moved by uncertified temporary contract workers to a secondary warehouse without individual chain of custody signatures for each item? Isn't it true that the ambient humidity levels inside that warehouse fluctuated wildly during the summer months? Dr. Thorne remains unshakable, his expression calm behind his glasses. The historical warehouse records do indicate a facility transition due to structural renovations, Counselor. However, the inner chemical pouch containing the silver duct tape remained completely intact, its specialized heat seal unbroken until it was unsealed inside our clean laboratory in 2026. The external temperature fluctuations could not penetrate the polymer lining of the containment container. The print we recovered was completely insulated from external environmental factors. Sterling shifts his attack, focusing on the software algorithms used by the state's biometric database. Let's talk about the software itself, Doctor. The next-generation identification platform utilizes predictive algorithms to reconstruct degraded ridge patterns, does it not? It essentially uses mathematical probability to fill in the blanks where the original physical print was smeared or incomplete. You are asking this court to bind a prominent, successful business leader over for malice murder based on a computer's guess of what a fingerprint looked like 23 years ago. The system does not guess, Counselor, Dr. Thorne responds firmly. It calculates architectural certainties based on established biological structures. The level of concordance required to trigger a match of this magnitude rules out false positives down to a statistical frequency of 1 in 80 billion. It is a mathematical impossibility for this print to belong to any other individual walking the earth today. The afternoon session transitions from the microscience of the crime lab to the historical geography of the transport logistics network. Catherine Vance calls to the stand Special Agent Marcus Vance, no relation to the victim or the prosecutor, a digital mapping specialist with the FBI's Operational Technology Division. Agent Vance projects a massive, three-dimensional digital model of the DeKalb Peachtree Airport aviation hangars from 2003 onto the screen, showing the intricate maze of supply rooms and security gates that define the Thorne family's commercial real estate and logistics business. The courtroom lights are dimmed, and the screen glows with a vibrant, digital recreation of the night Marcus vanished. The analyst demonstrates how the specific brand of reinforced silver tape was tracked directly back to the maintenance division of the Thorne aviation hangar, where Lucas Thorne had unrestricted weekend access in June 2003. He displays vintage digital inventory sheets that show an unlogged deficit of 2 master rolls of high-tensile aircraft wing tape from the specific maintenance cabinet Lucas had accessed during his summer shifts. The physical composition of the material is critical, Agent Vance explains, his laser pointer tracking a blue line through the virtual hangar blueprints. The silver duct tape recovered from the Chattahoochee River burial site was not a standard hardware store item. It was a specialized, military-grade polymer-coated adhesive designed exclusively to withstand the extreme air pressure and thermal fluctuations of commercial aircraft operations. Lucas Thorne's family business held the exclusive regional distribution rights for this specific manufacturer in 2003. The defendant didn't have to look for a weapon or a means of concealment, Your Honor. He stole the instruments of death from his own father's inventory, utilizing his security clearance to walk out of that hangar with a tape that would bind Marcus Vance's body. The visual evidence is overwhelming, a digital ghost of 2003 brought to life in high-definition brilliance, tracking a murderer's preparation and material sourcing with an accuracy that leaves the gallery breathless. The data analyst juror from the county pool sits with his arms crossed, his eyes fixed on the screen, his face white with the clarity of the presentation. Lucas Thorne sits next to his defense team, his fingers tightly gripping the edge of his manila folder, a subtle, microscopic tremor visible in his jaw as the clinical grid of the prosecution's case continues to tighten around his history. As the daylight fades outside the high windows of the Superior Court, casting long, dark shadows across the limestone paneling of Courtroom 4A, the defense stands to deliver their closing counterargument for the preliminary examination. Richard Sterling leans heavily on the legal thresholds of probable cause, arguing that the government has presented a brilliant piece of historical fiction, an elaborate circumstantial tapestry that fails to meet the heavy burden of proof required to disrupt a citizen's life after 23 years of blameless, philanthropic existence. He demands that the charges be dismissed immediately, allowing his client to return to his corporate empire and his home. Judge Henderson looks down from the bench, his expression unreadable as he reviews his notes, the silence in the courtroom so absolute that the scratching of his pen sounds like gunshots echoing against the stone walls. The fate of Atlanta's most shocking cold case hangs on a judicial determination that will either validate 23 years of agonizing investigative pursuit or allow a suspected shadow predator to walk out into the humid summer night as a free man. The sudden silence that follows the lifting of Judge Henderson's pen is so absolute that the mechanical hum of the courtroom's central air conditioning unit feels like a physical vibration in the chests of the public gallery. For Eleanor Vance, sitting frozen in the front row, this brief judicial pause is an unbearable elongation of the 23-year vacuum that has defined her existence since her only son was stolen from his bed. The judge slowly aligns his notes, removes his wire-rimmed reading glasses, and looks down from his elevated bench. His eyes pass coldly over the high-priced white-collar defense team, pause for a beat on the rigid, unreadable silhouette of Lucas Thorne, and then lock directly onto the prosecution. The court has fully considered the evidence and the arguments presented during this preliminary examination. Judge Henderson states, his deep, Southern cadence carrying the unyielding weight of absolute legal finality. The defense has mounted a sophisticated challenge regarding the historical management of the county's long-term repositories and the algorithmic reconstruction of the latent print. However, the forensic baseline established by the state's crime laboratory cannot be undermined by administrative speculation. The presence of the defendant's thumbprint on the subsurface adhesive layer of a specialized material used to bind the victim's shroud is a devastating, immutable biological reality. When combined with the exclusive corporate logistics records linking the aircraft-grade polymer tape directly to the defendant's family inventory, the threshold of probable cause is not merely met, it is overwhelmed. This is not a circumstantial theory. It is a clinical demonstration of access and identity. Lucas Thorne will stand trial for the malice murder of Marcus Vance. This case is bound over, and the defendant is remanded into state custody without bond. The sharp, authoritative strike of the wooden gavel triggers an immediate, chaotic rupture of motion within Courtroom 4A. A dozen National News Pool reporters vault from their benches, their shoes clattering violently against the hardwood floors as they race toward the rear exit doors, desperate to be the first to broadcast the live updates to the satellite trucks waiting on the sweltering plaza outside. Eleanor Vance drops her head, her hands covering her face as she lets out a ragged, trembling sob of pure validation, a release of a psychological weight she has carried through 23 seasons of silence. Across the central aisle, Richard Sterling does not look at the gallery. He immediately leans over his table, his hands sorting through a stack of pre-drafted motions as he whispers rapidly to his associate, already mapping out an aggressive interlocutory appeal to the Georgia Court of Appeals. But Lucas Thorne himself barely offers a physical acknowledgement of the judicial decree that has effectively guaranteed he will spend the remainder of his natural life behind a steel door. He merely nods once, a slow, calculated movement of his head, his eyes remaining fixed on the grain of the defense table. The mask of the charismatic, unblemished real estate mogul remains perfectly intact, but beneath the table, out of sight of the cameras, his knuckles are split white, his long fingers tearing at the hem of his tailored navy trousers with a force that betrays the internal terror screaming through his veins. As two armed county sheriffs step forward, their hands resting on their duty rigs as they command him to rise, Thorne smoothly straightens his posture, brushes a non-existent speck of dust from his sleeve, and steps toward the holding cell door without once looking back at the community he had so ruthlessly manipulated. The formal judicial confirmation that the 2003 cold case will proceed to a full criminal prosecution instantly alters the operational tempo of the federal and state task force, elevating it from a localized forensic breakthrough into a massive, multi-state institutional dragnet. The specialized cold case squad, operating out of a secured, windowless command center within the Atlanta FBI field office, does not spend a single second celebrating the binding order. They understand that a preliminary hearing requires only a baseline showing of probable cause. A full criminal trial before a 12-person jury demands an airtight, absolute narrative certitude that can survive a continuous, scorched-earth defense campaign. They also know that Sterling's firm will now deploy a small army of private investigators to dissect the personal and professional histories of every forensic analyst involved, searching for the slightest procedural variance that could trigger a mistrial. To neutralize this counteroffensive, a specialized unit of federal financial forensic accountants is brought into the operations room to completely unspool every economic transaction Lucas Thorne executed from the summer of 2003 to the present day. They begin digging through thousands of microfilmed bank records, commercial property deeds, and ancient tax filings from the early 2000s. The investigators are operating on a dark, chilling behavioral hypothesis. A predator who possessed the clinical calculation to execute a flawless abduction from a secured suburban home, evade a massive regional dragnet, and clean a primary crime scene so thoroughly at 18 years old did not simply deactivate his dark impulses after a single offense. They suspect that his meteoric rise within the Atlanta real estate market, a career defined by aggressive land acquisition and the rapid development of isolated rural tracts, was inextricably linked to a much larger, darker itinerary of violence. As the financial data begins to populate the analyst's digital mapping screens, a series of strange, glaring anomalies emerges, starting in the spring of 2004, less than a year after Marcus Vance's murder. Despite his development firm still being in its infancy, Thorne had established a sequence of private, out-of-state holding companies registered in Delaware and Nevada, utilizing a string of falsified corporate identification numbers that bore variations of his maternal grandfather's name. The travelogues compiled by cross-referencing his old private aviation clearances and fuel receipts reveal that Thorne made over 30 unlogged weekend flights to various rural municipal airports adjacent to the massive national forest networks of Georgia, Alabama, and North Carolina, always traveling during long holiday weekends when his corporate offices were completely locked down for seasonal breaks. The implication of these long-forgotten flight paths sends a wave of profound, bone-chilling dread through the federal task force. They realize that Thorne wasn't just hiding a single, historic murder. He may have been leveraging his family's private aviation logistics empire to operate as a nomadic, high-velocity shadow predator, utilizing the small, unmonitored airfields of the southeast to move between isolated wilderness zones, hunting in the shadows of the regional college campuses before returning to his pristine estate in Buckhead. The cold case is no longer just a localized search for justice for Marcus Vance. It has expanded into an active, multi-jurisdictional homicide investigation that threatens to unearth a decades-long trail of missing young men across 3 states. Meanwhile, back in the quiet suburban neighborhood of Buckhead, the atmospheric weight of the upcoming trial is completely suffocating for the local residents. The exclusive, tree-lined cul-de-sac where the Thorne and Vance families had lived side by side for decades has been transformed into a permanent, high-definition theater for true crime tourism. Independent documentary crews, local news reporters, and true crime podcasters drive slowly past the properties, their camera lenses pointed at the empty porch where a young Lucas Thorne used to sit and comfort Marcus's mother. The local residents deeply resent the invasive, sensationalist spotlight, yet they are trapped in their own internal struggle to process the profound psychological trauma of the revelation. At the Regional Youth Center, where Marcus had been a star volunteer in the winter of 2003, a temporary memorial of white candles and vintage photographs is erected near the entrance of the historical gymnasium. The images of Marcus, wearing his track uniform, his face lit by a bright, confident smile, stare out at a new generation of children who were born decades after his disappearance, a haunting reminder of a future that was violently stolen by the boy next door. The older volunteers and neighborhood elders walk past the memorial with their heads down, unable to shake the sickening realization that they had shared country club tables, tennis courts, and neighborhood association meetings with a monster for nearly a quarter of a century. The structural fracture within the police department deepens with each passing day as the state attorney general's office continues its exhaustive audit of the 2003 homicide logs. The independent investigators uncover a pattern of systemic administrative neglect that had crippled the original precinct during the shifting priorities of the early 2000s. Files reveal that critical neighborhood surveillance reports regarding a dark, unmarked aviation transport van idling near the Vance home on the night of the abduction were completely lost during a chaotic precinct relocation, buried beneath a mountain of unrelated corporate fraud reports. Current detectives are forced to look back at their own institutional history with a sense of profound shame, realizing that the killer's survival was not just a product of his own clinical cleverness, but a direct result of a broken system that allowed an execution to slip through the cracks of a rapidly expanding city. Inside the high-security administrative segregation block of the Fulton County Jail, the absolute isolation is beginning to exert a slow, corrosive toll on Lucas Thorne's psychological armor, even if his facial mask remains unyielding during his brief legal visits. The human mind, no matter how cold or detached, cannot survive the sudden, simultaneous exposure of all its hidden graves. The jail logs reveal that Thorne has completely stopped sleeping, his eyes remaining wide and fixed on the ceiling of his cell through the long, freezing hours of the night. The closed-circuit cameras capture him sitting on the edge of his narrow bunk at 3 a.m., his hands shaking violently as he stares at his own fingernails, his lips moving in a frantic, unyielding mutter that sounds like a map being read in the dark, a rapid, rhythmic recitation of aviation coordinates, landing strips, and the names of rural towns that have long since been forgotten by the rest of the world. As August bleeds into the final weeks of summer, Richard Sterling launches his first major post-hearing legal counteroffensive, filing a comprehensive motion for a change of venue with the Superior Court. He presents the judge with an exhaustive, 500-page portfolio of media analytics, newspaper headlines, and television transcripts, arguing that the saturated, sensationalist coverage of the midnight raid and the preliminary examination has completely poisoned the local jury pool. He claims that the term Buckhead Phantom has been so deeply embedded into the public consciousness of Fulton County that finding 12 objective citizens within the metropolitan area is a statistical impossibility. He demands that the entire trial be moved to a rural county in South Georgia, hundreds of miles away from the urban center where the emotional resonance of the crime is most potent. The prosecution team fights the motion with a ferocious, uncompromising determination, filing a detailed counterbrief that includes a comprehensive demographic survey of the region. Catherine Vance argues that the horror of Thorne's betrayal is not a localized phenomenon that can be evaded by changing counties. It is a historic, national narrative that has gripped the entire state of Georgia. Moving the trial, she argues, would do nothing to mitigate the publicity while placing an unconstitutional, crushing logistical burden on the elderly witnesses and the surviving family members who have waited 23 years to see justice delivered in the same community where the blood was spilled. As the legal arguments play out in a series of tense, written briefs, the Cold Case Task Force uncovers a critical, long-lost witness who could provide the final, devastating link between Thorne's identity and the night of the abduction. Through a painstaking digital reconstruction of old security clearances from June 2003, analysts identify a retired late-shift refueling technician named Walter Briggs, who had been assigned to the main gate of the DeKalb Peachtree Aviation hangar on the night Marcus Vance vanished. Briggs, now 81 years old and living in a remote mountain town in North Carolina, had never been interviewed by the original 2003 detectives due to an administrative oversight that omitted the private hangar logs from the primary homicide file. When two federal agents arrive at Briggs's cabin, they find an old man whose memory of his airport days remains razor-sharp. When shown a vintage photograph of Lucas Thorne from 2003, Briggs doesn't hesitate. He immediately points a shaking finger at the image, his voice trembling as he recounts a specific, highly unusual interaction that occurred at 2:15 a.m. on June 19, 2003, just hours after Marcus Vance disappeared from his bedroom. Briggs remembers Lucas driving his family's corporate transport van up to the hangar's fuel bay during a mandatory late-night maintenance lockdown, utilizing his specialized executive pass to bypass the standard security protocols. He told me he needed to drop off a load of old corporate display materials before an early morning flight. Briggs tells the agents, his eyes wide with the sudden, historical weight of the memory. It was suffocatingly hot, and he looked completely unraveled, his linen shirt soaked through with sweat, his face and arms covered in deep scratches that looked like they came from briars, or a severe struggle in the brush. I told him he shouldn't be on the tarmac during a maintenance freeze, but he gave me a cold, hard look, told me to clear the gate, and drove straight back toward the rear equipment lockers where the high-tensile silver aviation tape was stored. When he came back out 20 minutes later, the rear suspension of that van was riding low, heavy, like he was hauling a massive weight. I didn't check the cargo bay because I knew the Thorne boy. He was a regular fixture at the airport. I never thought, God help me, I never thought he was carrying his best friend's body in the back of that van. This explosive, long-delayed statement provides the prosecution with an invaluable piece of direct human testimony to complement the absolute certainty of the molecular science. It bridges the gap between the microscopic thumbprint trapped in the silver tape and the abstract geography of the Chattahoochee River burial site, placing Thorne's scratching hands behind the wheel of a vehicle at the exact airport facility where the instrument of concealment was stolen. The final piece of the puzzle fits into place with an unsettling, terrifying perfection, tightening the legal noose around the real estate developer's neck and stripping his defense team of their remaining alternative theories. The story of the Atlanta cold case, once a frozen, forgotten monument to an unsolved suburban tragedy, has transformed into a raging, high-velocity torrent that threatens to pull down names, reputations, and historical assumptions across the entire landscape of the state's legal and corporate establishment. It stands as a stark, cinematic testament to the idea that time is an illusion when confronted by the unyielding march of forensic evolution, and that the modern world possesses the capability to reach deep into the dark of the past to demand a full, violent accounting for the secrets buried in the mud. As the summer heat begins to break over the sprawling canopy of Atlanta, both sides prepare for the commencement of the full criminal trial, a historic, cinematic confrontation where a golden boy's mask will be permanently ripped away and where a city's 23-year night of absolute terror will finally face its definitive, thunderous conclusion. The legal battle for a change of venue is fought on a fiercely contested Tuesday morning in mid-August as a sudden, torrential summer thunderstorm slams across downtown Atlanta, turning the sky an ominous slate gray and flooding the historic corridors of the Pryor Street Municipal Center. Inside Courtroom 4A, The air conditioning struggles against the external humidity, creating a cold, heavy atmosphere that magnifies the tension vibrating through the packed chamber. The defense table is a veritable fortress of paperwork, stacked high with multi-volume binders containing thousands of pages of digital news articles, nationwide television transcripts, and social media analytics. Richard Sterling stands before the Superior Court judge, his tailored suit immaculate, his movements sharp, and his voice booming through the speakers with a calculated, theatrical edge. He paces the length of the wooden bar, gesturing emphatically toward the crowded gallery as he launches a direct, frontal assault on the cultural memory of the metropolitan area. Your Honor, what we are witnessing in this district is not routine journalistic reporting. It is a systematic, media-driven crucifixion of a citizen before he ever steps foot in front of a jury, Sterling declares, his arm extending dramatically toward the bench. The moniker, the Buckhead Phantom, has been broadcast into every household, every radio frequency, and every mobile device in North Georgia for the last consecutive 30 days. The prosecution has carefully engineered a dark, cinematic mythology, the image of a high-society predator utilizing an elite corporate aviation infrastructure to execute his childhood friend, and they have saturated the public consciousness of Fulton County to such an extent that the presumption of innocence has been completely incinerated. If we attempt to impanel a jury within this municipal center, we will be forcing 12 individuals to sit in judgment of an administrative narrative they have already consumed, processed, and implicitly condemned. We are demanding that this trial be transferred to a jurisdiction hundreds of miles away from the urban center where the emotional resonance of this historic case is most volatile. But the Assistant District Attorney, Catherine Vance, remains completely unswerved by the defense's performance. When she steps to the podium to deliver the state's response, she does not offer emotional rhetoric or counter-theatrics. She simply places a heavy, bound demographic study on the wooden stand. She utilizes a comprehensive survey conducted by an independent research firm over the preceding 3 weeks, which analyzed the baseline awareness and objective neutrality of over 600 registered voters across the judicial district. The defense is intentionally confusing extensive public awareness with systemic prejudice, Your Honor. Catherine responds, her voice low, resonant, and dripping with a cold, professional certitude that cuts through the courtroom's heavy atmosphere. Our statistical data demonstrates that while 84% of the surveyed demographic is aware that an arrest was made in connection with a 2003 homicide, fewer than 12% possess any detailed knowledge of the specific forensic mechanics involved, namely, the subsurface laser mapping of the latent fingerprint trapped beneath the adhesive layer of the silver aviation tape. The citizens of Fulton County are fully capable of separating the sensational headlines of the evening news from the clinical, objective truth that will be presented within this chamber. The defense doesn't want an impartial jury, Your Honor. They want a disconnected jury. They want to drag this historic process to a remote corner of the state where the specific nuances of our regional logistics landscape are unfamiliar and where the violent violation of a suburban home doesn't feel like a scar on the very ground beneath their feet. The people of this community have a fundamental constitutional right to sit in judgment of a crime that tore their own social fabric apart 23 years ago. The Superior Court judge takes less than 48 hours to deliver his written decision. The defense's motion for a change of venue is officially denied. The trial will remain in downtown Atlanta, but the court orders an expanded juror pool of over 700 citizens to ensure an exhaustive, multi-layered selection process that will eliminate any individuals pathologically compromised by the media coverage. It is a major, definitive tactical victory for the state, keeping the legal battlefield anchored in the precise geographical region where the emotional stakes are highest and where the investigative resources of the Cold Case Task Force are fully concentrated. With the venue secured, the specialized federal and state task force shifts its operational focus to Walter Briggs, the retired airport refueling technician whose long-forgotten memory of the rainy night of June 19, 2003, has become the crown jewel of the government's behavioral timeline. In a highly secured, soundproofed room at the Atlanta FBI field office, prosecutors, behavioral analysts, and digital mapping specialists sit around a massive mahogany table, analyzing the high-resolution digital scans of the original DeKalb Peachtree Airport gate logs that Briggs had verified. The ink on the old log sheets is slightly faded, a pale blue ballpoint script on cheap, lined industrial paper, but the notation at the 2:15 a.m. marker is razor sharp. Unit 4. L. Thorne. Emergency corporate display clearance granted. It is a devastating piece of contemporaneous evidence, written decades before anyone knew the specific composition of the silver duct tape that wrapped Marcus Vance's body, long before the forensic science existed to track subsurface skin ridges. It is the unvarnished, routine observation of a gatekeeper, preserved in a dusty administrative archive, waiting 23 years for its moment in history. The behavioral analysts use this log entry to construct a chilling psychological profile of the defendant's movements. They demonstrate that Thorne operated with a cold, situational intelligence of a calculated schemer, utilizing the chaos of a late-night maintenance lockdown to mask his entry into the hangar facility, where he could secure the materials required to convert a violent abduction into a permanent, hidden river grave. However, the defense team instantly recognizes the immense danger Walter Briggs poses to their structural strategy. Within 48 hours of the judge's venue ruling, private investigators retained by Sterling's firm begin descending upon the remote mountain town in North Carolina, where Briggs has lived out his retirement. They cross-reference his old medical files, interview his neighbors at the local senior center, and dig into his personal history, searching desperately for any sign of cognitive decline, age-related memory confabulation, or personal bias that can be weaponized during the trial. They unearthed that Briggs had been treated for early-stage vascular dementia in the spring of 2022, a medical detail that the defense immediately translates into a series of aggressive pretrial filings. They argue that an 81-year-old man with a documented neurodegenerative condition cannot reliably testify about a fleeting, 5-second interaction that occurred through a rain-splattered car window in the middle of a dark aviation complex nearly a quarter of a century ago. They characterize his statement as a product of retrospective suggestion, a false memory planted by federal agents who showed him vintage photographs and fed him details of a crime he had already consumed on the evening news. While the legal skirmishes over witness credibility intensify in the judge's chambers, the financial forensic analysts achieve a parallel breakthrough that unearths a whole new layer of systemic darkness beneath Lucas Thorne's career. By utilizing advanced digital scanning to cross-reference the out-of-state safety deposit boxes with old commercial property deeds along the regional river corridors, they discover that Thorne had purchased a small, isolated plot of marshland near Gary, Indiana, in the summer of 2004, less than a year after his Delaware holding companies were activated. The land sat directly adjacent to an old, abandoned rail yard that had been utilized by the regional shipping networks during the height of the Midwestern expansion. When a team of federal archaeologists and state police cadaver dog units is quietly deployed to the Indiana property, they encounter a landscape of pure, industrial desolation, a field of cracked asphalt, rusted oil drums, and overgrown weeds that had sat undisturbed for over 20 years. Within 6 hours of entering the perimeter, 3 separate, highly trained forensic dogs flag a concrete retention pit located beneath the skeletal remains of an old tool shed. The subsequent excavation unearths a deep, subterranean void that smells of decayed oil and stagnant water. Hidden beneath a layer of old railroad ties, investigators discover 2 heavily rusted, industrial steel drums, secured with chains that match the manufacturing specifications of the DeKalb Aviation hangar line. The contents of those drums send a shockwave of absolute, paralyzing horror through the entire multi-state task force. Inside the reinforced steel containers are the skeletal remains of 2 unidentified young men, their bodies preserved in a matrix of industrial grease and heavy-duty utility wrap. The medical examiner's preliminary assessment reveals an identical, chilling signature. Both victims had been executed with a precise, clinical ligature strangulation using the same type of thin nylon cord that had taken the life of Marcus Vance in June 2003. One of the skulls still bears a fragment of silver aviation tape secured over the jawline, a terrifying, unmistakable calling card of a serial predator who had used the vast, interconnected transport landscape of the Southeast and the Midwest as his private, invisible cemetery. The discovery completely alters the historical scope of the prosecution. Lucas Thorne is no longer just a local cold case suspect facing a single charge of murder in Atlanta. He is unmasked as an apex, nomadic shadow predator whose operational longevity was protected by the very corporate logistics infrastructure that built his family's wealth. He had weaponized his position as a developer, utilizing his routine travelogues and his specialized access to private aviation centers to move across state lines, hunting in the shadows of the regional college campuses, leaving behind a trail of blood that was swallowed by the sheer expanse of the wilderness zones. Back in the quiet, affluent neighborhood of Buckhead, the news of the Indiana discovery breaks like a thunderclap, shattering the remaining illusions of suburban peace. The residents are paralyzed by a collective sense of profound, existential dread. The realization settles into their chests with a sickening weight. The charismatic young man who had sat on their front porches for 23 years, contributing to local charities and sharing backyard barbecues, wasn't just hiding the ghost of Marcus Vance. He was a walking monument to a generation of missing young men, a prolific monster who had successfully used their trust as a shield to protect a lifetime of clinical slaughter. Inside the high-security administrative segregation block of the Fulton County Jail, the psychological armor of Lucas Thorne is finally beginning to show signs of terminal structural collapse, even if his facial mask remains frozen in a posture of stoic defiance during his brief legal visits. The human mind, no matter how cold or detached, cannot survive the sudden, simultaneous exposure of all its hidden graves. The jail logs reveal that Thorne has completely stopped sleeping, his eyes remaining wide and fixed on the ceiling of his cell through the long, freezing hours of the night. The closed-circuit cameras capture him sitting on the edge of his narrow bunk at 3 a.m., his hands shaking violently as he stares at his own fingernails, his lips moving in a frantic, unyielding mutter that sounds like a map being read in the dark, a rapid, rhythmic recitation of flight markers, landing strips, and the names of rural towns that have long since been forgotten by the rest of the world. As the calendar pages turn toward the final days of August, the prosecution team files their amended exhibit list with the Superior Court, a narrative masterpiece that binds the physical geography of Atlanta to the industrial graveyards of Indiana through the absolute certitude of modern science. They have constructed a comprehensive, three-dimensional digital matrix that links the chemical composition of the silver tape found at the 2003 Buckhead crime scene directly to the adhesive structures recovered from the steel drums in Gary. Every piece of data is locked into a master chronological trap from which there is no escape. The stage is officially set for the commencement of the full criminal trial, a historic, cinematic confrontation where a golden boy's mask will be permanently ripped away and where a city's 23-year night of terror will finally meet the unyielding light of absolute justice, and where the memory of Marcus Vance will become the lever that pulls down the final wall of a monster's fortress. The heavy, reinforced double doors of the ceremonial courtroom click shut, sealing out the muted, humid roar of the downtown Atlanta streets. Inside courtroom 4A, the air is thick, stationary, and cold, charged with the immense historical gravity of a moment 23 years in the making. It is the first Monday of September, and the final legal collision of the state of Georgia versus Lucas Thorne has officially arrived. Every wooden bench in the expansive public gallery is packed to its absolute physical limits. Observers sit shoulder to shoulder, their breath shallow in the poorly ventilated room. The atmosphere is gripped by a collective, anxious anticipation as 12 citizens file into the wooden jury box, their faces solemn, their eyes completely avoiding the defense table where the fallen Titan sits. Lucas Thorne has traded his orange inmate uniform for an impeccably tailored navy blue wool suit, a crisp white shirt, and a conservative silk tie, a calculated, final visual manipulation designed by Richard Sterling to evoke the image of a respectable, dignified leader of the old, affluent Atlanta establishment. His dark hair is neatly parted, his thin reading glasses perched high on the bridge of his nose as he pretends to study a stack of corporate development charts. To any casual observer walking into the room, he looks like a kindly, philanthropic executive preparing to deliver a lecture on regional urban planning. But across the central aisle, the prosecution team moves with the cold, quiet efficiency of an execution squad. Catherine Vance stands at the podium, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed directly on the jury box as she prepares to shatter 23 years of absolute security in a single, devastating opening statement. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Catherine begins, her voice low, resonant, and vibrating with a controlled, professional fury that instantly commands the entire room. 23 years ago, in the suffocating heat of June 2003, a shadow fell over the tree-lined enclaves of Buckhead. A vibrant, brilliant 18-year-old student named Marcus Vance was torn from the total sanctuary of his bedroom without a single sound echoing down the hallway to where his parents slept. For nearly a quarter of a century, the people of this city believed his killer was an outsider, a transient phantom who had rolled off the interstate, committed an unspeakable act of cold-blooded violence, and dissolved back into the deep woods of North Georgia. They believed this because the technology of that era was blind, and because the sheer speed of our city's expansion allowed the case files to gather dust in the dark basement of a forgotten archive. She pauses, turning slowly to face the defense table, her arm extending as she points a single, steady finger directly at the defendant. But the physical evidence will demonstrate that the phantom wasn't a traveler from a distant place. He was a trusted companion. He was the boy next door. He was the childhood best friend who sat on his front porch for 23 years, sharing family dinners, comforting a weeping mother, and lifting Marcus's casket into the hearse, all while carrying the chilling memory of a tactical execution inside his chest. The defendant, Lucas Thorne, utilized his intimate access to the Vance home and his family's corporate aviation logistics infrastructure to target, abduct, and conceal his closest companion, leaving behind a forensic signature that he believed was invisible. Today, the state of Georgia will reach back through 23 seasons of silence, rip away that golden mask, and show you the terrifying truth of the monster who has been hiding in plain sight. For the next 90 minutes, Catherine delivers a masterful, chronological roadmap of the prosecution's case, weaving the complex threads of next-generation digital imaging and vintage transportation logs into a tight, suffocating narrative trap. She details how modern automated lasers penetrated the degraded adhesive layer of the silver aviation tape found at the river burial site, isolating a pristine latent thumbprint that maps directly to Lucas Thorne's identity with an astronomical certainty of 1 in 80 billion. She outlines the historical gate logs verified by Walter Briggs, placing Thorne at the private hangar fuel bay in the middle of a mandatory late-night maintenance lockdown just hours after the abduction. And finally, she drops the ultimate Chandong revelation into the jury box, detailing the discovery of the industrial steel drums on the Indiana property, linking the chemical composition of the aircraft-grade polymer to a multi-state trail of nomadic slaughter. The jurors listen in absolute, rapt attention, their faces hardening as the clinical calculation of the crime is unspooled before them. When Richard Sterling stands to deliver the opening presentation for the defense, the contrast in style is immediate and confrontational. He does not look at his client. Instead, he mounts a savage, direct assault on the reliability of human memory and the integrity of modern algorithmic science. He holds up a copy of the original 2003 county property logs, shaking it toward the jury box. The government has built you with an elaborate, high-definition digital ghost story, Sterling declares, his voice booming through the courtroom's sound system. They have taken pieces of fragmented data, 20-year-old memories from a compromised witness suffering from documented neurodegenerative decline, and predictive computer models, and they have woven them together to destroy the legacy of a man who gave his entire adult life to honest, philanthropic labor. They talk about fingerprint certainty, but they won't tell you about the chaotic warehouse relocations of 2006, where thousands of boxes were handled by uncertified contract workers. This is not a triumph of justice. It is a triumph of sheer desperation by a cold case unit under intense public pressure to clear a historic mystery by any means necessary. With the opening arguments concluded, the prosecution wastes no time, immediately calling its first witness to the stand, Eleanor Vance, Marcus's surviving mother, who has endured 23 years of agonizing isolation to face the man who hollowed out her world. The courtroom is gripped by a profound, emotional stillness as the fragile elderly woman is assisted to the witness chair by a county sheriff. Her voice is a quiet, papery whisper that requires the audio technician to adjust the microphone closer to her lips. Under Catherine's gentle guidance, she describes the normal, domestic mundane details of June 18, 2003. The low hum of the desk fan inside Marcus's bedroom, the quiet ticking of the hallway clock, and the sudden, terrifying emptiness of the room the next morning, the open window letting in the humid morning air. Who did your family look to for comfort and support during those first dark weeks, Mrs. Vance? Catherine asks, stepping closer to the well. We looked to Lucas, Eleanor whispers, a single tear cutting through the wrinkles on her pale cheek. He lived just 3 doors down. He was in our house every single day. He organized student search parties, he distributed flyers across the colleges, and he sat right at my kitchen table, holding my shaking hand. On the day of the funeral, when my husband was too broken by grief to stand, Lucas was one of the pallbearers. He helped carry my son's casket on his shoulders. He looked me dead in the eye and told me that whoever did this would face God's eternal damnation, all while knowing that his own thumbprint was trapped inside the silver tape that had bound Marcus's wrists in the dirt. The revelation causes a visible, visceral shudder to run through the jury box. One of the alternate jurors drops his pen, staring across the central aisle at the defense table with an expression of unadulterated revulsion. The defense table remains completely frozen, Richard Sterling staring down at his legal pad, knowing that no amount of technical forensic skepticism can easily erase the grotesque, human reality of that psychological betrayal. Lucas Thorne had not just executed his companion, he had embedded himself in the family's grief, utilizing his position as a trusted survivor to monitor the progress of the investigation and ensure his own absolute security across a generation of human history. When Sterling stands for the cross-examination, he chooses his words with extreme caution, aware that any overt aggression toward the elderly, grieving mother would completely alienate the jury. He focuses entirely on the fluid, chaotic timeline of the morning of the disappearance, establishing that multiple neighborhood volunteers, frantic family members, and low-ranking patrol officers had moved through the small suburban bedroom before the scene was officially sealed by the homicide unit. He wants to plant the subtle, early seed that any forensic cross-contamination could have occurred during those initial hours of frantic, uncoordinated panic, and that the fingerprint could have been transferred via a shared utility role at a local community safety gathering. Eleanor answers with a quiet, dignified clarity, refusing to let her memory be fractured by the lawyer's suggestions. As the first day of testimony draws to a close and the court is formally adjourned, the image of Eleanor Vance sitting in the witness box lingers in the heavy, cold air of courtroom 4A like a permanent monument to an unyielding pursuit of justice. The opening salvo of the trial has set a dark, cinematic tone that renders the defense's technical arguments increasingly hollow. Outside, the media pack consumes the details of the mother's testimony, broadcasting her words to a national audience that is increasingly transfixed by the ultimate downfall of the Atlanta developer. Lucas Thorne is led back to his transport vehicle under a heavy guard of state troopers, his face still an unreadable mask of stone, but the walls of his multi-decade fortress are beginning to show their first terminal cracks, and the long, slow march toward absolute accountability has officially begun. The third day of testimony opens with a tactical shift by the prosecution, moving from the raw, emotional weight of the victim's family to the cold, undeniable precision of physical evidence. The relentless summer rain outside has settled into a persistent, dreary mist that hangs over the municipal courthouse, mirroring the grim technical analysis unfolding within. Catherine Vance calls Marcus Reyes to the stand. The retired detective walks with a slight limp, his expression hardened by decades of carryover frustration, his eyes focused entirely on the prosecutor as he takes the oath. Reyes represents the institutional memory of the original investigation, the man who was on the ground in 2003, watching from the inside as the gears of justice were deliberately jammed by the limitations of the era. Under direct examination, Reyes details the immediate procedural anomalies that plagued the first 48 hours of the search. He describes how he